Welcome to the Spiritual Underground Podcast, coming to you as always from the backyard woodshop of DTM Enterprises. You may or may not have noticed the difference this morning, but instead of having Dan the Man, your host, on the mic, you have Christopher, his sponsor, and you guys are in for a real treat this morning. We are going to interview Dan to hear his story of recovery and what brought him to the place he sits in today. Welcome, Dan.
Hello. I'm
glad to have you on your own show.
Yeah, it's cool to be on the other side of the table.
Now you're not in control anymore.
Yeah.
Welcome. Glad you're here. I'm really excited to do this. I was thinking about this morning that, years ago when we're just beginning this journey, you tell people the cool shit that's going to happen to them and tell them that, one day you'll be interviewing your sponsee, his own story on his own podcast. I'd be like, well, first of all, what's a podcast, right? That's what we would have said 10 or 20 years ago. So I'm very excited to do this. I know you have some commercial announcements you usually get out of the way to make sure your listeners know where to find you and all that good stuff.
Yeah, so I will hit those really quickly. There is a website that complements this podcast. It's spiritualunderground.org. You can see pictures of the host and the guests on there, and some show notes, and there's a contact me page on there too. If there's anything, I welcome any feedback to the podcast or anything at all. If you'd like to be a guest on the podcast, that's a way that you can reach me. The music wrapped around the podcast is by Darren Frank. You'll hear that at the beginning, and if you stick around for the end, you'll have the entire song. You'll have a lead in at the beginning, and then as always, we want to make sure that you are looking out to go to Amazon and take a look at this 12-step spiritual recovery book that my sponsor has written. The guy who's interviewing me today is on Amazon. 12 Step Spiritual Recovery. We call it TSSR, so if you might see when I'm typing or if you're looking at anything on the social media, I'll abbreviate it TSSR. That is 12 Step Spiritual Recovery, James Christopher Cone. It is you can get a hard copy of that book, or it is also available on Kindle. So those are my little commercials. Now if I can just get those commercials to be paying, we'll be in good shape.
One day.
Yep, and I could also say it's brought to you by DTM Enterprises. For all your woodworking needs, go to dtmww.net.
Handcrafted works of art. Can't get anywhere else.
So I'll start paying my own sponsorship fees. I'll take it out of my left pocket, put it in my right.
There you go.
Yeah.
So, welcome to the show, Dan.
Well, thank you.
Spotlight on you.
Yeah, there's been a few times people have been asking me, when are you going to tell your story? When are you going to tell your story? Well, when the time comes, I will.
And this man has a great story, and he has a great way of telling it, too. Feeling okay this morning? Not nervous? Not scared?
I am not nervous. The nervousness, I used to be nervous sitting down here, and I'm actually more nervous in a meeting in front of people than I am sitting here.
It's very hard to stand up at that podium. And sometimes there's not even a podium, right? But that podium, I think it's our tradition that you have something to hold on to because you're just like shaking in your boots when you get up in front of everybody.
And it's really, there's a anxiety. I'm not anymore like not comfortable speaking. I'm plenty comfortable speaking in front of people, but there's some kind of nervousness, some kind of anxiety, that's some butterflies in the belly. Heck, sometimes it's just when I got my hand up, I'm going to share. I feel that in my belly.
Well, I think there's some programming involved in that too. Just in my family system, my truth wasn't honored, so I learned to shut up and not share it. Yeah. And also, when you're in school and the teacher makes you stand up in front of the class and do something, there's that pressure that if you mess up, what's going to happen? The whole class is going to laugh, right?
Yeah.
So there's none of that in recovery, thank God.
Yeah, right. Yeah, and there is that. You feel like the little underlining, that programming of feeling like you're going to say something stupid. And golly, I should be over that by now.
Or you're going to say something wrong, and that's the beauty of telling your story, is it's your story.
Yeah, it can't be wrong.
And it's funny how some people within recovery will come up and try to correct you on your story. Like, I want to take issue with something you said. This is a classic line. And I'm like, really? Well, it's my truth. I don't know what else to tell you. You can tell your story next week. So.
Get my story out, and we will let you edit my story, I suppose, is what we'll sit here and do.
So it's sanitized for your protection. Yeah. I'm sorry I said something that offended you.
Yeah. Speaking of, that last time I spoke of getting that card where that woman said, just had the criticism and gave me a card after speaking. A card.
Unfortunately, that's not the first time I've heard that that's happened. And that's a cowardly way to do it, right? You're not even willing to face the person in the eyes and say, hey, this is the deal. They're going to hand you a piece of paper and then run out the door.
Yeah, she actually spoke to me and talked to me like with like encouragement and stuff like that in face to face, and then like backhanded, like, here, slip this in your back pocket and said, don't read that yet. Don't read
to
that
the
yet.
piece of paper, it said, God told me to tell you this. So,
Yeah.
we have all types in recovery.
Yep,
And they're
that's
all
okay.
in their progress of healing. We all were sick, and we all said crazy stuff. I mean, my old timers in my home group were very tolerant of some of the crazy stuff I said in my earliest recovery. So it's tough.
Yeah.
But I don't want to take up all your time on the mic, so where we start, we like to start with your sobriety date, and then we can either start from whatever spot you like, but there's that what happened, or what it was like, what happened, and where we sit today. So what is your sobriety date, Dan?
My sobriety date is January the 1st of 2015. And I've heard some people talk about that date being a January 1st date, and that it really probably I stayed up past midnight, and I always make sure that I heard Robin said something the other day, a new line like this, but I took it from Earl H. He says, no, once again I way overshot the mark, and I did not make it to midnight once again. Many New Year's Eves, and we were talking about that earlier, where I'm pre-gaming so hard that I don't make it to like the real festivities. I'm shot before the party starts sometimes, and that's what happened that night. The gal that the speaker that we were talking about said it got too late too early, and that's what happened that night. But truth is that by this time I'm struggling to. I've been hanging around recovery halls and the bouncing off the walls and halls of recovery for 4 years. By the time that sobriety date stuck, and it just did for whatever reason. I was pretending to be sober at that time for everybody who was watching, and forcing myself to moderate because of the consequences I had on my shoulders at the time. And that was just one of those things where I can't even answer exactly what happened that night, but the next day I never drank again or used again. It's just the way it worked.
For anybody out there that's hurting and in that place, to me, that's the worst hell on earth. You've been outed, right? Everybody already knows you got a problem. You've been going to meetings, but you just can't still put the plug in the jug or put the drugs down. And it's horrible. And it's a horrible existence.
Yeah, it really is. It gets
just quit. Just pick a sobriety date and stop. It's going to happen inevitably. It's going to stop that way, or you're going to die or go to prison at that point.
Yeah. So,
why don't you tell us a little bit about where you started from?
Yeah, it's kind of funny. You always wonder about like where you ought to
Indiana.
start when you do this stuff, because I do have a firm belief that I was that this alcoholism thing was in me. This irritable, restless, discontent kind of deal was in me from the get-go. And certain things exasperated that, certain pieces of trauma that I had, or and I'll use those terms. I don't weigh it as heavily today as I did for some time, but some things happened that I frankly didn't know how to process, and I had nowhere to go. I felt like I couldn't talk to people about things, but there was a time, and I still feel this way to some extent, that I can't really lay this at the feet of my upbringing. And you hear a lot of people who have some really nightmarish childhoods, and you go, wow, man, if that happened to me, I can kind of get that. But I really didn't have that. I had a wonderful upbringing, almost maybe to the overly permissive side of things rather than the other. I was born here in New Albany. Really, like from where I'm sitting at right now in the house that I spent most of my childhood in. We moved into this house when I was 3 years old in 1972. I spent most of my time here, but I can actually walk to the other two houses I lived at in the 3 years prior to us moving here. And one of them is just a few blocks that way, and one of them's a few blocks that way. But it's still just. I had things going on when I was growing up that I didn't understand. Some stuff happened surrounding some sexual trauma type issues. Like I said today, I don't look at it as that. I look at more of kids experimenting now, but I just didn't know how to process it when I was a kid. I had some issues with some babysitters and some things when I was little. I remember really having trouble, like feeling like I could be who I was supposed to be. When I was in school with other friends, with even best friends that even with my cousins and relatives. I had 5 male cousins that were all within a year of me growing up. In 1968, 69, my father's family all had boys. And I had, and then if you reach out just a couple more years with my younger brother and their other younger brothers, I had a handful of boys males that I got to grow up with close by, and that was great. I loved that. We would get together and have a big troop of us hanging out, but yet I still felt that little bit of detach and that thing where I like felt the need for approval all the time. That I needed to do things to be. To be the funniest one or the most daring one, or to be out there on the edge so that you could pay attention to me. Flip side of that is that like once I got into school, I could remember actually shrinking back down from the other thing where I didn't want to be seen. Inside my family system, I wanted to be a superstar, right? With these people I was comfortable with. When I got to school and one of the events, and this sticks to me forever, when we was in the first grade, they'd pick people to go clean out the chalk erasers. You go outside and get to do that, and that was actually a privilege to get to go do that. And I remember one day getting to do that, and so I went out and I cleaned the chalk erasers, man, and was pretty proud of myself. And I come back in the building, and a few hours later we go out to recess. Well, I had clapped the chalk erasers on the side of the building, not clapped them together and cleaned them out. So the whole side of the building had all this chalk, and I got reprimanded for that in front of everybody as we went out the door for recess. The teacher looked over and was like, "What the hell is this?" She didn't really go there, but that's the way I felt it. All of a sudden I felt the spotlight on me. Look at you, dummy. Who would do such a thing? And boom, right then, that just cower down, and it's funny, because today, ultimately that's really not a big deal, right? I mean, that's really not that big a deal, but it's still in here. It's still a memory that I can remember being, just like boom, just the spotlight was on me. Everybody was laughing, and I didn't know how to process that.
And to a child's mind, what I would relate to from that is instantly telling me I was in the wrong. So I make up my own mind as an alcoholic, because I already got the alcoholic mind that I am never going to be caught in the wrong again, right?
Yeah, and any of those little things that were like privileged items that you could do, anything, taking a pass up to the principal's office, or any of the little things that you would do in school, from that point forward, I remember going, no, thank you. I'm okay back here. I'm going to sit back. I'm back here in the background, man. And that is okay with me. And some other things I remember some other things, some finding some things and sharing them with my buddies. Only we got a guest coming in a little bit late, which is perfectly cool. Come on in. Got a chair warmed up for you.
We got the gathering going on.
Yeah,
people are showing up.
Yeah.
They know something's happening in the woodshed. Wood shop, I should say.
Yeah. Yes, so some people will say the woodshed. That's got a bad connotation, don't it? Where your dad takes you out to the woodshed.
Yeah.
This certainly doesn't have that connotation in it. This is very cool energy out here. But I remember confiding in some of my friends about certain things, and the same kind of deal where, I was trying to make connections with people and I think it's in our nature to do that, to connect with people. I find that today that I have a real desire to connect with people at some deeper level today. And when I tried to do that, like in a natural way when I was younger, it would seem to always backfire on me. I'd tell you something that I held close to me, that I felt that was important to me, and then next thing you know, I'd be being made fun of because of it got around school, and guess what he did, what he told me, and that kind of thing, and even some of what I would consider some of my closest friends doing that to me. So once again, all this is rear view mirror stuff. I didn't have any idea about this until I come to recovery and started doing some of this processing and inventory work and looking into what was going on with all that, what made me who I am, what programmed me, is that I started learning, same kind of thing, no, I just won't tell you anything. I will start, we talk about, and you've taught me this about this trash can I'm carrying around, my visualization is it's a galvanized metal trash can with backpack straps on it. Sure. And I'm carrying it around with me, and I put it on when I was a little kid, and these things happened to me, man, and I didn't have nothing to do with them. I had no way to really cleanse them, deal with them, so I just stuck them in the damn can, and they sit down there in the bottom of that, and I just kept on putting those things in there over time. And one of the things is I couldn't trust you. I couldn't trust anybody, and it come into the same kind of thing of I see some kids nowadays, some more, I'd say, enlightened kids that have come into my life lately that have the ability to like talk to their parents and say things, and I give their parents a great deal of credit for. I think that leaving that door open, that they can actually say things to their parents that I was never able to do. I just had to. I had no other tool but to stuff it. And and I still do that at times. I still can do this. We joke around about one of my favorite conflict tools. Well, a couple of them. One of them is to run. Conflict avoidance is run, or sweep it under the rug and pretend like it never did happen. Let's just act like that didn't happen. And that's really how my family system operated most of the time too.
Yeah,
we
that's
had
a
something
hallmark
go on.
of alcoholism, is keeping that perfect exterior.
Yeah.
You're dying inside, but hell, we look good on the outside.
Yeah. And I still sometimes will actually look at myself today as recovered and know for a fact that something has happened and something has really shifted in me today, without a doubt. And everybody sees it and I know it, but I will still look in the mirror at times and go, are you just still doing that shit? Are you still polishing up this external, and really down inside there is still that other thing? So, those kind of things has come along, and I think, if you can escape that as growing up, I suppose there's these 1 in a million or whatever the number is that actually escapes most any kind of like, I'll just keep on using that word trauma that sounds really severe. I don't necessarily mean it like in a in a physical trauma type of way, but it's something that actually has the impact on my upbringing. If you escape that kind of trauma, I think it's a rare thing personally. Now, what if it triggers what you do to cope with it? I guess that's where some of the differences lie. But as I started, growing up, one thing I found is that if I engaged in sports, that was a place that I could get some of that approval, like the same way I did inside my family system when I wanted to show off and do that. And I was pretty good at most sports, so I found a home and a hiding spot there where I could excel at sports and get the accolades, and everybody kind of accept me and give me the props and pet me for doing a good job and all that. So I fell into that, but it still had its other things, and I, for instance, like in the same house, I would go play ball across the way here, and my dad had a whistle, and when he whistled, it was time to come home. And you could hear it all over the neighborhood. And it would be, I would be over there playing basketball, and he would whistle. And my friends didn't want me to leave. They wanted to continue because the ball game is going on, and you lose a player and all that. And that's some of the times when I started being like peer pressured into, and I think that's completely natural. I don't think it's anything out of the ordinary. But to start receiving that peer pressure to where I was torn about, I really need to leave. Mom, dad's hollering for me and it's time to go home. But these friends are saying no, and they're calling me a pussy for leaving, right, and doing that kind of stuff. And no, it'll just be a few minutes longer. And so those kind of things, that same kind of thing. And I think that started also to playing into whenever I was actually offered the first time to have some kind of substance that somebody was saying, hey man, have some of this. It was that trying to fit in. It was that inability to speak my truth, even though there was something I can still remember back when those substances were first offered to me. And I think it was someplace around, I'll just jump into that because the same guy who I was playing basketball with had some older brothers. And, I look back now and I see how I was the older brother in my family. Mm-hmm. I look back to some of my friends who had older brothers, and they were into things that I was not yet into, and they facilitated us, to start using and doing things that I wouldn't have normally, went against my gut. It just really did. And I can still remember that back then, is that one day it was a snow day, and I was in the 7th grade, and it was in this house. And that buddy of mine I was playing basketball with would have been my best friend. Me and him were side by side on the basketball team. We did that all the way up into high school, actually. And we got to know each other really well, so we played together really well because we were so close and we played together all the time. I played basketball and played, just hung out. He called up one day, back when we didn't have this is the phone rang on the wall with a cord attached to it, and it was a snow day, and he said, your parents work, right? And I said, yeah. And he said, well, we're off school today. He said, how about we get some beer and come over to your house and drink it? I still remember that going, that does not sound like a good idea.
Right.
But I could not say no. in the same way that when I would stay playing basketball longer than mom and dad would, he's over here whistling. Now he's whistled 3 times, and I'm still letting these guys keep me over there when I know I should go home. I said, yeah, okay. And so he walked over here, and we were waiting. And I have always had these friends. I always joke about this. It's like I got these friends that this guy, I always had him. He was the first guy I knew had a moped, had some wheels, so he could get around town quicker than anybody else did. And he also, like, this doesn't make sense to me today, but it seemed like he had a full beard in the 7th grade.
Possible.
And I really think he did. It probably wasn't like some of our buddies' full beards today, and so back then you could get served, and he would get it, somehow or another. So he comes down my street, which is a slight incline, and my driveway takes a quick right turn and uphill. And we're watching for him in anticipation of him being there, and there's just the 3 of us, me and my buddy, sitting inside waiting for him to get here. I don't want to use names because just people will listen to this, and I think I'm going to try to keep those names out of it. Doesn't make any difference. The guy on the moped comes sliding down the street, and he tries to take that right-hand turn, and I can still remember this, too, like a photographic memory of him laying that bike down and sliding down the street with that, with those. And he had 2 boxes of Little King's beer in his arms. And I remember that he had turned loose of the bike, and he was cradling those boxes of beer as he slid down through there. And we ran out, and I can remember it plain as day. We ran out, and we grabbed those boxes of beer from him, set those safely aside, and then helped him up with his moped and everything. And we proceeded to bring him inside. And I tell this, I sit at the table that's sitting right there in my dining room right now. Anybody that's been in the house has seen it. It's an old heirloom table from my grandma. It extends out to 12, 15 feet long or something. We sat around in my dining room here and pretended like grown-ups and popped those beers and started shooting the shit and sitting around the table at 7th grade, whatever, how old you are there, 12, I guess. I can't remember. And pretended like we were adults, just sitting around drinking beer. That was fun for a little bit, and I do remember this too because it was the very first time that I once again way overshot the mark. It was fun for a little bit, and then boom, I don't remember a single thing. I remember my mom shaking me awake in my bed. It was dark out. Of course, it was wintertime, so who knows what time it was, it being dark early, and asking me what was wrong with me. And I just said I didn't feel good. And, she tucked me in and asked me if I don't know, want some chicken soup or some Jell-O or something. And went on. Well, I found out the next day, that I'd puked all over the place. They put me in the shower and showered me off. They had, before the end of the day, they cleaned everything up and sanitized the building, to get all the bottles and everything out of there. And I got away with it. And I still remember now of thinking, I will never do that again. That was the first time, saying, because I just felt like shit. Golly, man, the very first hangover like that. And the drinking was normalized in my family. There was always some beer around, and even I remember we always had camps and places, not unlike the camp we have now where the retreats are held, where we would, at times my parents and family would have keg parties. But I never remember seeing people like drink to a point to where it was. I never saw this excessive thing. There might be an excursion here and there where somebody did, but not like a real party thing. It always seemed to be kept manageable. So the drinking was always around, and it seemed normal, and it seemed like something grown-up people did. I wanted to be a grown-up too. We were rushing that life thing, and I remember, too, that, it wasn't too awful long. I was calling my buddy on the basketball team going, hey, man, let's do that again. Can we get some more? And it just started off doing that, and it was real sparse at first, right? Now and again, you had to be really cool about it. You had to have everything set up, all your ducks in a row, so that you weren't going to get in trouble. You had to have some place to stay, some place to do all this. Of course, when you were in, that kind of age, it's not easy to do. We always had people around that could get us, like these older brothers. I remember a really shady old man that lived down the street over here that would invite us to his house. And I don't know if you remember those old dirty David Allan Coe songs. Y'all remember them? Do you remember?
No.
I almost hesitate. There's some of them are so dirty, I almost hesitate. This is an explicit podcast. I think I'll leave the titles out. But he would play those for us, and he also had old like Richard Pryor, or I guess old comedy records that he would play and have us over. And like I'm wondering now today, like exactly what this old dude was up to. But the other thing he would do was he would buy us beer and liquor, and we could go down there, and anytime if we had a little bit of money, he would get us some.
I think that's a sign. I tell my patients that you might actually be an alcoholic right from the get-go. If you rush right back to the thing that got you in that bad way that you were at the end of the day, like for instance, if you go to a restaurant and the meal might be okay while you're there, but then you go home and puke the rest of the night and lay in your bed and feel like you're dying, would you rush to go back to that restaurant?
Yeah,
Only
right.
alcoholics.
Yeah, no doubt. And I could think one time I had some smoked oysters out of a can, and I got sicker than a dog off of them. I still haven't ate those smoked oysters out of a can. I still have not done that.
I went to a chain restaurant one time and got bad onions off the buffet and got food poisoning like I've never had in my life, and I've never been back to that chain restaurant, even though I realized logically it's just a weird incident from one restaurant, and it was in Minneapolis actually, but I will never go to that chain again for that very reason.
Very good point, yeah. And darn if we didn't just keep chasing that. One of the things that come not too long after that was like 7th grade, and I'd moved from 6th grade to 7th and had a whole brand new host of folks, right? Because you were kind of like in your isolated thing. It's kind of funny little thing how that grows and how you get naturally exposed to a greater population as you proceed through school. So I'm sitting in my homeroom at Hazelwood here, and I meet a guy that for whatever reason starts clicking with me. And he's a new friend. He's kind of a quiet guy, but he looked really cool to me, like the Breakfast Club bad guy cool, and we became friends. And a couple other people around him were talking about smoking pot. And again, in my gut said, yeah, you shouldn't do that. But for whatever reason, when it come around to doing it, when it was offered, I obviously said yeah, and that's kind of like a joke around now. Like as my using progressed and as I got older and stuff, the little thing was, if somebody would say, would you like to try some of this? It would be, I would, like if it was pills, well, I would eat them and say, yeah, what was it? That it's that quick that I'm gonna, yeah, I'll try it. And so that started out back then. But there used to be a hesitancy, and I knew that probably wasn't something I should do. There was something in my gut that said I shouldn't do that. A number of these guys who I met all had parents that either dealt or smoked a lot, where they could steal it, and it wasn't missed. Once in a while, you come over. It was always fun when you showed up with your buddy and his mom ripped their asses for pinching out of their bags. And of course, we deny it, and not me. There's nobody testing anybody. They weren't like, today I think parents would probably go head down to Walgreens and you'd be tested.
I think you had those breaks hit you too because of being an athlete. Being an athlete, you're not supposed to smoke anything.
Yep.
That ruins your performance.
Yeah. There was that athlete thing behind me. Yeah, and that actually has a pivotal spot in my story. So we started doing that, and the next thing you know, I'm finding, and I can think back to before I had a driver's license, and again, when I'm interviewing somebody, when they tried to put the timeline together, and my little standard joke is if I knew I was going to tell this story, I'd have kept better track. I'll just roll with it and don't worry about exactly how the timeline lays out, and maybe somebody can poke some holes in it and have at it.
You were high at the time.
Have at it if you want to. Yeah, right. Yeah.
There's no time when you're high.
I can remember like hanging out. One of the things we did, we hung around in cemeteries. And there's a number of them around here, and they would always have this little, and I don't know what to call it, a little, like a stage kind of thing in the middle, like a place to hang out, Maybe they would have ceremony, maybe they would do funerals in those things, and they'd be covered, and we would go in those. And one of them that was our favorite had big, tall hedges all the way around it. So if you were standing, you could get seen in there. But if you would sit down on the edge of it, you were behind the bushes, and you could sit in there and nobody would see you until they were right up on you. And we sat down in this one, and we would go, I can remember we would ride our bikes down to this liquor store down the road here, stand outside with money and ask people, will you get me a bottle? Will you get me a bottle? And some of the people would be like, fuck no, kid, get out of here before I call the cops on you. we'd have to scatter for a minute, and then come back, but somebody would always do it. Somebody would always end up buying it for you, and we would get like a bottle, and we'd get like a bottle of Jim Beam, and then we'd ride down the street and get a 2 liter like Sprite, and then we would go sit there in the cemetery and drink it and smoke dope until it was like all gone, and then get up and go traipsing around. We'd go riding our bikes, we'd go play, we'd go fiddling around until that wore off, and it's time to crash. I remember doing it with tequila. We get tequila and something to chase it with. One of my favorite things to chase that tequila with was ginger ale. And right now, even saying that, yeah, everybody in the room just made a funny face. Chasing that, and because we never were making drinks or anything. We were just drinking right out of the bottle, right out of a fifth of something in a 2 liter or something, and just chasing it down. We also bought these Boda bags. You ever seen those that are leather canteens? You know what I mean? They got a strap on them and a cork. They look like an old time thing. It's supposed to look like an old
Daniel
skin
Boone
sack. Yeah, it looked like that. We would buy those and with a funnel and fill those up because you could wear that underneath your jacket. And it would lay up against your hip, and you could roll around and have that fifth of whiskey on you, and nobody'd be any the wiser. And all that happened. I got exposed to that. We started tripping acid at that age too. Mm-hmm. We started, and I have no idea how it come about, but I remember again, oh man, that don't sound like a good idea, but. And I don't really, people would say something to me, and the other kind of question is I don't don't really know where I even knew about what pot was, when it first come around and what it was, and I don't remember being able to ask either, like, what do you mean, what is that, you want to smoke some pot? If you're going to, I guess, if we're going to do that, I'll do it, and the same thing when the acid and hallucinogens come around, and I remember, I think it was blotter, right? It was on a piece of paper. And it just looked like a little bitty centimeter by centimeter or something.
Totally harmless.
Piece of paper, And my buddy said, yeah. And now my friends knew that we needed to put some space. You needed some time to do this. This was not something you were going to do before you went to school in the morning, or
God, no.
But I didn't know that at the beginning, right? And so we started doing that, man. And we had some great times, and I hate to, there's another speaker I heard that talks about this, that to glorify those old times, but the fact of the matter was I did have a lot of fun for a long time.
Well, sure.
It was a lot of fun until it wasn't anymore.
Right.
And when it stopped abruptly. But to do that, and again, we were on bicycles. My daughter just got caught sneaking out of the house just the other night at her mom's. And it gets really weird because I live in the house where I did most of this stuff. So I have a real hardcore connection with these behaviors because my bedroom is my son's bedroom now in that house right there. Wow. And my window, I would sneak out. I kept my bicycle parked right outside my window. I wouldn't put it in the garage. I would keep it outside the window, and I would have to be home at dark or whatever, sometime I'd have to be home. Uh-huh. And I would come home, say goodnight to mom and dad, go through the house, out the window, on the bicycle, and back out.
You were Batman.
And I remember, there was times we'd do that. We'd trip on acid, all night. I remember, I have vivid memories of riding home. I was really good at riding my 10-speed with no hands. I could turn corners and listening to the birds chirping as daylight, as the sun was rising. And the trip is still on you, but I need to be getting back into my bed by the time morning came around.
So this is an honesty program, right? And so part of my admittance of being an addict or an alcoholic is that I did have good times. And so the way I frame it is I had my time, right? We all had our time until it changed, until it turned on us.
Until it shifted,
So you can admit that.
Yep.
That's the difference between us and church, right? In church, you have to dress up and pretend you weren't a sinner on Saturday night.
Yeah.
But, I think that's fine. You're not romancing it.
Yeah, and I'm not really. It's just there's just a little bit of a funny air around glorifying that stuff that is what brought me to my knees.
I do think we need to keep that in check, though, because we can romance ourselves right into a relapse.
Yeah.
And then find out, that's why I quit. It doesn't work anymore.
Yeah. And kind of the disease will make me forget the bad.
It's funny. John Goodman was on the other night talking about Chris Farley, and he said the very same thing. He said, at the end there it was just miserable. but I couldn't stop. That's
Yeah.
what addiction truly is. You're not enjoying it.
Yep. I just remembered things collapsing on me. It began from one thing of just of that, and using some kind of substance became more and more a regular thing, to where I was smoking dope every day. I had a buddy another friend who I met in that same homeroom. I would go pick him up for school, and he would always have some pot, and we would get high in the morning on the way to school. We had open campus at high school. We would come back out and we'd ride around. Our other friends, even before I had my driver's license, the guys who got their driver's license before us, or our older friends, we would ride around. We'd get high before school. We'd get high at lunchtime. Mostly we really didn't drink much, except for like on the weekends.
Because they can smell it.
Yeah, and you just got, you can kind of, I can tool around high and operate.
Mm-hmm.
Once I started drinking, I really wasn't going to be very, I wasn't going to be managing things really well. But we kept on doing that stuff, and I remember getting my driver's license. I got my first DUI within 6 months of having my driver's license.
That might be a sign you're an alcoholic.
Yeah. Judge said that too. But you couldn't, anything to not look at that back then when they were saying it. It just wasn't even a possibility. It's all rearview mirror stuff looking.
Sure.
And I was on a road between one of those camps we had where we went out drinking. I had these spots like that where we could go to this camp and go buck wild, right? And just us kids. And decided I was going to drive to pick up some girl in some other town, and took off and ended up hitting a big, I believe it was a big Chevy Suburban. It was a big sport utility, and I was in a little Pontiac Sunbird, and I hit them head on. I was probably half and half, and I careened through a cornfield and doing the donuts, and slammed into something hard, and it turned out to be a telephone pole. I was telling this story just the other day. I still have this vivid memory of when my car come to the stop. And it was late at night. It's 2:00 in the morning. I was left to center. I was going too fast, drunk, 16 years old, had no business. And the first thing I did whenever I hit that, when the car stopped and I regained a little bit of okay, what next? I remember dumping the clutch, man, turning the key, was going to start that car up and get the fuck out of here right now. Mm-hmm. And of course it didn't do anything, And they come over and asked me if I was okay, and they were all looked to be okay. The cops came, arrested me, went to jail, spent the night, got a slap on the wrist. Mom and Dad hired lawyers. I had to go to some AA meetings, court ordered to some AA meetings.
Wow, what age was that?
16. And I remember I had another friend, an older friend down here, and I was talking to him, and it was actually my then girlfriend's older brother. And I'm talking to him about having to go to court ordered AA, and I don't know, what. And he goes, "Oh man, I know where one's at." And he was just a couple years older than me, and so he took me to go to, and it's the same place. It's the carriage house, what we call down here. I've spoke there. You have too.
Yeah.
Took me down there. The only thing I can remember is smoke, old men, coffee. That's the only thing I
was
remember.
Thinking, what a waste. You're just a baby. Baby is not going to relate to AA.
Yeah. And I think, if I remember right, I had to go to 3 meetings. Mm-hmm. And I think 2 of those 3 meetings we stopped and got beer afterwards.
That's about right.
Yeah. And it was just another, check off the box thing, comply.
Now, I'm just curious, during all this time, did your dad or your mom ever sit down with you and really have a heart-to-heart? Not a lecture, but a heart-to-heart. And say, "Son, what are you doing with your life?"
I don't really know, Chris. That was their discipline generally, was to sit down and talk to me. I remember some really stiff heart-to-hearts from them over certain issues here and there. As of all things, the one that sticks in my head more than any of the others is when I got caught smoking cigarettes. And that goes back to another substance I started leaning on. When I started stealing cigarettes from Mom, catching that buzz at first, and then there was no buzz anymore, but you needed the nicotine. Carried on that till just a couple years ago, actually. But I remember that stiff talk. I don't have a memory of a talk about the drinking. I remember learning that I needed to manage it better.
Hide it better, yeah.
You really shouldn't speed while you're drinking and driving. That's not a good idea.
Good luck.
Yeah. I got another one. So I went through that, and I ended up losing my driver's license. Now I'm back on my 10 speed again. I had my driver's
So
license.
cool.
I had a car.
It's so cool.
And now my bike is back
16,
parked
17
outside my garage again, and I'm tooling around on it around town until however long it was before I was able to get a driver's license again. I can't remember. I really don't know how that timeline went. Boy, my voice. I do know the next big event that happened to me is that I was continuing to be a good ball player. I could play basketball. That friend of mine, we were, some of us even, they called us the Twin Towers. Now I'm 6'3", and we both stopped kind of growing. I kind of wonder about that. But at the time, we were really tall for our ages, and we towered above a bunch of other kids. And together, we made a pretty decent team. I still have tons of newspaper articles where we were high scoring. And I mean, because like in this little town, man, the elementary basketball games are reported in the paper, and it'd have our scores, Kurt Hawkins, Dan Reeves, the scores that we had, and we were good, and we were sitting on, so like when I was in the 9th grade, junior high, last year of junior high, we were invited to come and sit and play on the high school team, and we actually get to play some JV ball and get to, home games only pretty much. We didn't really get to travel with them. And then when we were sophomores, we actually got to sit for, like a lot of the sophomores were on the JV team. You go back after the game, change your clothes, you'd be in your street clothes supporting the varsity team. We got to sit down and stay dressed and potentially play a little bit on the varsity team when we were sophomores, which was an honor, and I knew that we were doing something, and we were really good. New Albany High School had a good ball team when we were sophomores. We had some seniors that were really, really good, and all had scholarships secured. And I think we went to a away game, and I can't remember. It seemed like it was Evansville. And before the thing, some of the seniors come because I'd already started getting this reputation to be able to get some marijuana on a fair, regular basis, and so I had some, and some guys come and ask if we could get, can you hook us up for after the ball game, Friday night or whatever it was, and I did. Of course, that was more of that wanting to seek the approval more than anything else. I wanted to be in. And I worked really hard to find some, and at one point I remember I was sitting in the gym in the locker room at that ball game, rolling a joint in the locker room at that ball game. And on the way home, we decided that we would smoke it on the bus on the way home from the away game. The coaches were asleep up in the front of the bus, and we would go into, it was a nice luxury type of bus with a restroom and everything. It wasn't a school bus. It was more like a travel coach. We went in the bathroom and we would smoke dope and blow it out the window and air it out and shut the door, and then the next guy would go, and we were trading off, and it was working for a little while. And one guy, I remember, because I was a sophomore, I had to sit towards the back of the bus, right? Coaches were in the front, seniors in behind that, and it went like, low man on totem pole, you were in the back. Didn't matter if you was a guy that brought the dope or not, you were in the back of the bus. And I remember smelling it. Some dude didn't air it out well enough, and the heads turned like almost like if you had a deck of cards.
Like a wave at the stadium.
A wave at the stadium, yeah, from the back of the bus to the front of the bus going. Heads cranking around, and then when it got up to the front, the coaches were like knocked out. You could see they had their lips pointed towards the ceiling, their necks cranked back. But man, when that smell hit them, that woke them up. And they turned around and they marched back and checked it out, and they went straight up to it. And because I was back there, they really didn't do anything to me, and they grabbed up and nailed some of those seniors that were involved in it. There was I think 3 seniors, a junior, and myself. There was 5 of us, and they held them after when we got back to the school. They held them, and the other 4. But I was in the back and was not included with the group. And they didn't identify me as part of it. So I slipped out of there and got home without getting detained after the deal. But somebody had seen me rolling that joint. I still know the guy, too. Somebody had seen me rolling that joint in the locker room and told on me. So then when I went to school the next day was, I got pulled in there, and we ended up getting kicked off the bus.
You got burned by some of that peer pressure stuff because you intentionally rolled that joint to show off in front of the dudes.
Yeah.
To be the top dude.
It'd be cool.
Look at me, I don't care.
Yeah.
And I also call that what you're describing now I mean, this is pretty early in your story. I call it when worlds collide. You have this one life, you're an athlete, trying to be a good kid, do your right thing. Then you have this budding addict showing up. And when they start to intertwine with each other, that's when the consequences start to happen. The thing you love is being threatened by this new thing that you kind of love. It's almost like trying to have an affair.
Yeah, it
Right?
is.
All of a
Yeah.
sudden you start getting caught in your lies and things start showing up and you're like, oops.
Yeah. And that was talking about that pivotal point earlier of when things really shifted for me then, because I got kicked off the basketball team. My sports and stuff was ripped away from me. I looked at that like, and it was really, to me, it was just like a whole big fuck you to the world, and I will go do this. Mm-hmm. And so that just one of them points in my life where the addiction and the use accelerated off of like that pinball kind of thing. When I hit that bumper and I careened
Pedal
off
to
the other direction, man. I just took off and then went right from being that jock kind of dude who could still play that role. I could still look like that basketball player for a minute, to flipping the switch. My entire dress changed. What I wore to school changed. My hair, started letting it grow out. I completely switched. And they told me, I actually went out for the basketball team again. That was when I was a sophomore. I went out for a basketball team again. We got suspended from school for 5 days, and we all got kicked off the team. Those 3 seniors had secured scholarships. They lost those scholarships.
Wow.
They lost big time, something that mattered to them. Just to I gotta be a little bit careful because people could probably look it up, but really, who gives a shit? One of those guys just died not too long ago, and from everything I can see, it's still carried on from his substance abuse.
Oh, really?
Yeah, from all the way back then.
One of our
I know
brothers.
one of them is sober today, and I see once in a while there'll be something about him. He's got 5 or 6 years of sobriety now. From everything I can see, all 5 of us that got in trouble that night all ended up with trouble down the line over substance abuse addiction issues.
Now, I know your story, and you're probably going to mention it, but I want to make sure I think it's important to you, I know it is, that it was in the paper.
Yes, yeah. And so, Leo, we were minors, and they printed our names in the newspaper. And, my mom and dad, longtime residents of New Albany, my dad knows, it's just, my parents knew everybody. And so, boom. And so, my name was in the paper when I got that DUI at 16, and then here it is again. Here I am, little Dan, getting in trouble again, once
it's
again.
It's the kind of deal like, you go in the barber shop and everybody's talking about it kind of deal, or they say, oh, that's that guy.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep.
Wow.
Yep. And you can still find that if you Google it. I have done that. It's still out there. You can find that. Yeah. It's still out there. And it's in like archives kind of stuff, because there wasn't no internet when that went down. That would have been 1985 or something.
Some of us grew up doing our business in bigger towns, so we could get away with things easier. But, yeah, when you're in a small town, everybody knows your business.
Yeah.
That's tough.
Yeah. And I just, I don't want to, we're getting on like 50 minutes, and I don't want to war story the hell out of it. But there is this stuff, like that stuff all built up to that, to where I was just regular using, and then like at that point, I never like took the throttle off again after that getting kicked off the basketball team thing. Then I'm doing full tilt, as much as I can do. Fuck everything else. Somehow or another, I was able to continue to get good grades. I always was in some way that helped me and my buddy that went to school together, and I drove him all the time. We kind of had a little competition at school. We'd get high and we'd see who could do the best. We'd kind of compete with one another on getting good grades, and he was always really good too, and a pretty smart kid. Matter of fact, he's another one that just died not too long ago from this stuff. I had a buddy over doing drywall work not too long ago from high school. And we started talking about friends that are gone now.
Yeah.
And, man, we racked up a good dozen to 20 names pretty easily of folks that are gone that we knew from high school as a direct result of, or some result or suspected result of substance issues.
That's our common fate. It's rare to be a survivor, actually, with our disease.
Yeah.
So I'm going to play host for a second.
Go ahead.
And so, we need to talk about what it was like, and then what happened. And so since we are on the clock, and I do want you to have time to talk about what it's like now, so what happened, Dan? Obviously, you went pedal to the metal and full throttle. And What happened to bring you into the rooms of recovery?
So I'll just fast forward to some events of 19. I got another DUI. Got my driver's, this is all happened before I was legal drinking age. All that's before I even hit legal drinking age. Mm-hmm. And then once I hit legal drinking age, boom, once again, accelerating that use, got married, had kids, did all the stuff that is supposed to be looked at, had 2 cars in the garage, nice house, 2 kids, beautiful wife, all this stuff, continuing to drink and watching how over time that collapsed from going on drinking a few days a week to drinking, as my week collapsed, to drinking being a daily drinker and deserving beer on the way home from work and not stopping until I passed out. Basically, I wouldn't admit that that's what I was doing at night, but it just became that cycle, and like I'm running into friends and accelerating my use. I had a little period where I had friends that was doing cocaine, and we started down that path. I had another period where I was doing meth, and so whatever substance happened to be around, and most of what I liked was things that kept me up. Mm-hmm. I really didn't like the pot so much except for like a nightcap, to mm-hmm. slow me down to the end of the night, or maybe a wake and bake to feel better, that kind of stuff. But what I liked was things that kept me drinking, kept me in the game. Mm-hmm. So I will kick on up to.
It does make you wonder what you could have accomplished if you hadn't had this disease. If you were able to maintain a home and a job and a family and all that, just you wonder where your life would be if you hadn't had this illness.
Yeah, because really, I've really only had 2 real jobs my entire life. Mm-hmm. One of them I lost because I couldn't make it to work on time. I got hired out of high school, and I don't know, I was 20 years old or something like that. I'd been working for them for like 3 years, from like 17 to 20. And they kept on giving me chance again, telling me, if you can't make it to work on time, we cannot keep you. Mm. And when the guy finally ended up firing me, he had tears in his eyes over it. And I did too. He really didn't want to turn me loose, and he saw something in me that he wanted to keep. But the disease had a hold of me, and I just couldn't do it. And I kind of had that invincible syndrome where I didn't think it was a problem. So and so then I get this other job, and I progress, and I'm getting advancements, and like I said, I went through doing the life thing that everybody says you ought to do. Kids, marriage, doing all the stuff, life insurance policies, all the stuff that adults are supposed to be doing. Mm-hmm. Meanwhile, continuing to drink and use like a madman, really. Even up into when the kids were born, I said, is another one of those events where you told yourself you weren't gonna cut this down, you'll stop. I remember being fiending for alcohol when both of my kids were born. Mm-hmm. After my son was born, someplace like in 2005, I think it was. And I don't remember. I think my daughter was a little baby. I think, or maybe she wasn't here yet. I can't remember. I went on a thing where I was going to stop drinking on my own, and I hate to use these terms, but I'm just going to speak like Dan does. I sold myself out to the church because I thought that maybe if I would pour myself into that,
sure,
that I could. That would keep me sober, and some elements of it kind of helped, that community portion of it. I started involving myself in some service where we were working on vehicles and getting them put back together for single moms. So I was doing a little service work in my life, and I was service working at church and connecting community wise. And I still remember I stayed sober for 5 months, mm-hmm. which was eternity. Mm-hmm. And at the time, my wife had started changing her shift, and she was going to go to work on weekends only and nights. So then she would be home all week and then gone on the weekends, and the kids would be my responsibility on the weekends. And I remember coming home on one Friday, man, and going, patting myself on the back for that and going, I'm going to get a 6-pack tonight on the way home. And, of course, I was back a couple more times before that night was over. And that actually is what ended up being, by this time, and the whole reason it stopped working, right? The fun had ended. There would have been a lot of fun up through the 90s and all up through in all that time, but by now I couldn't drink and have fun anymore. I would get these headaches instantly, and I would try to think that the next beer or the next shot or the next one was going to make the headache stop, and it wouldn't. And my mom had a back surgery, and she was laid up for a long time in the hospital. And that's another one of the things I kind of skimmed by, is that my mom was like chronically ill all my entire life. From the time is another one of them trauma things. Is like when I was 10 years old in this house, I was sent outside to play, me and my brother, and I snuck back in and listened because she was telling some news to her brothers and sisters, or her brother. She only had brothers, but brothers and sister-in-laws and stuff, the family, that she had breast cancer. And I overheard that, and it didn't. Again, it was another thing I had to stuff in my can because to me, I just heard my mom had just got a death sentence, and I didn't know what to do with that, and I couldn't say because I was eavesdropping, so I couldn't go, hey, what did that mean? I heard you, and I walked with that, and I walked my entire life with like waiting for the other shoe to drop for my mom to die from one episode after another, where if it was structural damage from shoulders, backs, necks, skin cancers, throat cancers. She survived those double mastectomy breast cancer stuff, and she survived all that stuff for a long, long time. What I didn't know is all that whole time she was taking pain medication. I didn't know that at the time, and that's some stuff that's come to light since her passing. And but going back to that back surgery, I come home one day after grabbing some beer on the way home, because that's what I would do. I would stop right directly across the street. If I didn't have beer ice down in the cooler in the car, then I would get it as soon as across the street from the place I was working at. As soon as I would leave there, I would go get some. They knew what I was buying, and like when I finally ended up stopping, you go to these stores and buy, and you walk in one day and you don't, and they're like, and I remember I got a slushie that day, and they're like, what are you doing? I said, I've stopped drinking. No, that time didn't work. But I had stopped drinking, and they give me the slushie on the house. Congratulations. This is on us. But I come home from work that Friday with, I could drink, hell, I had 2, 3, 4 of them in me between work and getting home. Plus, I'd kind of drive the long way around, and my parents are watching my kids. And I come in the house, and I'm just mulling around the house, no big deal. Sometimes mom would fix dinner on those nights my wife was going to work on the weekends, and I walk into my mom's bedroom, and I clearly remember this too. Some of these things are just burned in, memories of seeing those prescription bottles sitting next to her bedside. And it's really the first time that I had any of that kind of awareness. I had a lot of times I got hurt. I was accident prone as all get out when I was a little kid, and I would end up with stitches, broken bones, all kinds of different things that would happen. And I would always get my mom would always make sure I got some pain medication. Now, this, again, is rear view mirror shit. And I would get a couple of them, and then that would be all I'd probably need. And I never paid attention to what happened to the rest of them. It didn't matter to me. I looked over and I saw those prescription pain, or those pill bottles. I just saw the prescription bottles sitting next to her bed, and I walked over and looked at it, and I picked them up, and I read 2 of them, and there was a handful of them there. Mom always had just a bunch of different script bottles. Like when she finally passed, man, it was like a kitchen garbage bag full of script bottles around, of a lot of just all kinds of crap, not stuff I was looking for. And both of the bottles said, take X for pain. And I remember that burnt in, for pain. I have pain. Mm-hmm. And so, in this kind of a joke, but not a joke, I opened up one of them. They were big pills. I put 2 of the big pills in my pocket. I opened up the other one. I shook 2 of them out. They were little pills. And I put them in my pocket. And after a few minutes, I thought, well, I'll go ahead and take 2 of these little ones. Well, those 2 little ones was like, I think if I recall right, they were both 40 milligram OxyContins, which I don't know, about 45 minutes later, all the pain was gone. There's still photographs around from that night. I can find them. I had the kids at home in do-rags, like red bandanas, and we were partying. We were having the greatest time that night, man. And instantly, the alcohol started working for me again. And I took those other 2 big ones the next night, and they didn't quite have the hit. They were turned out, now I know, because as running down that pain pill trail, I became a amateur chemist. You know what all those pills are and what the milligrams are, and how much had some weird concern for how much acetaminophen I was intaking. Pouring all kinds of other stuff in me, man. But I want to be careful about that Tylenol. You don't want to take too much of that, let me tell you.
We are professionals. I remember I have a client in group, and they say, the doctor gave me a prescription. I was like, what for? I don't know. Yeah, and how many milligrams? I don't know. I know it's total bullshit. I mean, we are on top of that stuff.
Yeah.
We know more than the doctor does about these drugs.
You know exactly what you're taking.
And we know which combinations work.
Yeah. So I watched that slip up on me too. The same thing where I would come over to mom's on the weekends because my wife was worked and I could get away with it, right? So I could do this little thing where she didn't know I was drinking at the level I was because she was gone all night long on the weekends and she slept all day. And so, like, I could really turn it on, and I think about now the insanity because I would leave my kids in bed and go get more alcohol and come back. And it collapsed on me where I was stealing that medication from my mom and I was only coming over and getting it on the weekends. And then I started coming over and getting it during the days. And, and I tell this little bit of a joke, too, about the steal. We always do a little thing I've heard around here about stealing your friend's drugs and help you look for it.
Yeah.
Well, I did that with my mom. Stole her medications, and then she would call me up and say, I am running out of medication. I'm not running out of my medicine. And I don't know what's happening. And we would do a little private investigation talk about who could possibly be taking her medications. I'm getting lock boxes, but I knew it'd be only a matter of time before she would leave the combination on the lock box, and all I had to do is pay attention, and I'd be in that. And so it never, ever stopped me. Although I did have to moderate at some level, obviously, but she just seemed to get, the amount she was getting, I know she's doing a little bit of doctor playing and doing some things like that where she had scripts from different docs and all that, but she was getting quite a bit, and it was enough for both of us most of the time. But that ended up drying up, too, and that brings us to what happened. And so I started, going in people's houses. First, it started out being my relatives and anybody else that I was actually allowed to be in their house and cleaning all that out. And it was unbelievable how many people had old pain medication scripts in their freaking medicine cabinets. You pop open a medicine cabinet and there was, a 5-year-old Percocet script of, 28 of the 30 pills. And I wouldn't necessarily take the whole thing either. I'd shake some out, put it away, and come back, but I'd eventually clean it out. And I ended up doing that until a point came that I was going into houses that I didn't know, looking for them because they were so prevalent every place else. If the people I knew had them in their medicine cabinets, certainly the people I didn't know had them in their medicine cabinets too.
So I've heard this story before, and you got to take me to that moment because my mind goes to you're standing outside a complete stranger's home, and you're thinking about going inside that home. Your heart must be pounding outside your damn body.
It did, and I think some of, looking back again, I think there was some of that adrenaline dump that I liked about that too. I think some of the fun.
Well, plus there's that ego thing about I'm good at it.
Yeah, and I was. Yeah. And so you knock on the door, make sure nobody's home, that kind of thing, and kind of walk around, act like you maybe carry some papers like you're one of these salespeople or something, have some pieces of paper in your,
electric
or
gas.
the heck, maybe it's some LDS, some Latter-day Saint information. I'll come teach you about Jesus Christ. But I have something so I could look like I was doing something, or have some kind of game to play in case you get called out. In case somebody comes and says, "Hey, what are you doing?" And I would, you could find windows that were open. People left their keys laying underneath the rocks out in the front yard. All kinds of different ways that you could find to get into people's houses without actually breaking something.
Right.
I ended up acquiring lock picking stuff so that I could also do that. I could get in and pick locks pretty decent. Some of these things are pretty easy to get into. It matters how the door is. Some of them you can actually just jimmy the door.
Right.
You don't necessarily without breaking anything.
Yeah.
And there was times where I'd punch that fucking window out too. And just matters what the circumstances demanded. That was last ditch. I didn't want to leave any tracks. I didn't want to leave any breaking and entering tracks behind me. And I wonder about I would guess a huge percentage of these places that I did that to probably never really had any idea that it ever was gone because I didn't steal anything else. I would see money
for the big items being gone.
Yeah, and sometimes socks drawers and stuff like that would be in our place. People would put their pills if it wasn't in a medicine cabinet. You could go through a couple drawers or kitchen cabinets. You knew all the places where to look. And hell, I run into money quite often and pass it by. Money was not what I was after. I didn't have the balls to go out on the black market and buy stuff. To go looking for drugs because I had too much to risk. Right. There was something, and I don't know what that goofy thinking was, why I thought it was okay to risk sneaking in there and doing this.
Oh, I know what it is. See, I'm sitting here doing my counselor wheels turning, man, and that's that criminal mentality, dude. You're convincing yourself, okay, I'm not really stealing because I need these pills. right? I have to get these pills. This is something I have to have. And you have extras. You're not going to use them anyway.
They're old. I love the old scripts. And obviously you weren't using them today.
Were you wearing gloves when you broke the window?
Most of the time not. Nope, most of the time
and
not.
You had your own car parked down the street?
Yeah, usually park someplace else and walk in. Yeah.
Still, it's your car with your license plate.
Yeah.
Anybody could see you drive away.
Yeah.
Yeah, amateur criminalism.
Yeah.
But still scary enough that I hate to think what could have happened if fate hadn't intervened.
Yeah. Well, it kind of did. One of the other things that I was doing is there's a house in the neighborhood, and there's some old people there, and we were friends, and I've known this, I've grown up in this neighborhood, and all these people in here knew me all my life, and so it wouldn't be unusual that when I lived here that somebody might need some help, and they would call or they would come and they would ask me for some help for something. In this particular day, and I remember this too, this old guy had fell out of his wheelchair. He had one of the motorized things. He could no longer really walk, and he was in one of them, I don't know what you call them, the motorized wheelchair.
Yeah, a little scooter.
Yep. And he fell out of it, and she couldn't get him back up in it. And she called the home phone and asked me if I'd come over and help him get back in the chair. And this is during that time when I'm doing all this other stuff. And I go over there to help. And I go to lift him out, man, and it's like eagle vision, man. You can see those scripts. There could be 15 script bottles sitting there, and I know 2 of them are what I want, and the rest ain't. I don't know how that, you almost could smell it. And I went bing, 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 and I saw those bottles sitting there, and I that very first time I connived and coursed them into another room, and then slipped back in because they're old people, they couldn't move fast, and slipped back in. Yep, that's what I want. Shook out a couple, man, put them in my pocket. They thanked me for helping. Anytime, let me know, call me. I'll help anytime you need me to help. And that started me going back into this house over and over and over again. They never did, they would be watching TV. They would be sitting in the living room watching TV, have it really loud because they couldn't hear, and I would twinkle toe behind them. Walk in their door, twinkle toe behind them, go back and get it. And like the medication used to sit out in front of the house. I noticed it slowly started getting moved further and further back in the house, and it would end up being in the old guy's sock drawer. And so I would slip back there and get them. And sometimes I'd slip over there when at nighttime, man, it'd be dark. And I'd slip over there, and he'd be laying in bed asleep, and I would go right into his bedroom and open up that drawer and get that medication and slip back out. And, he was continuing to get it. It kept on getting refilled. It kept on being, it was like a magic supply. It just kept on being. So that started to be a staple, and I didn't want to hit it too much because it was a little bit like the gold mine. It was like it's like the thing you didn't want to, like your fishing hole that's really good. You don't want to catch all the fish out of that hole. You got to leave some. It seemed like they were like repopulating or something there. And then come that night in June, and I believe the date was June 18th of 2014, and I did the same thing that I'd done. I was sitting here. I'd had a new girlfriend. The divorce was final. Lost a giveaway a marriage over this continuing to use. I've been playing around with AA for a few years, and I actually had a year of sobriety in 2012. Celebrated a year of sobriety on June the 12th of 2012. Now, I will tell you that I didn't drink for a year. I still dabbled with some other things, but I celebrated a token. I had taken some pills and I had been smoking some pot a little bit, but I really kept a lid on it. Still felt good about the year then. But I ended up having some life stuff happen. My wife ended up us having some issues and ended up getting divorced. And I crashed real hard off of that again. I'm back into pain pills harder than ever. I'm drinking more than I ever have. The divorce got final. I met some girl on the internet and went to meet her at a bar. And I even told her, I said, as I got a beer bottle, I said, I shouldn't be drinking this. She's like, what do you mean? I'm an alcoholic. I celebrated a year of sobriety not too awful long ago, but I've been drinking for a while, and I hadn't drank for a little bit at the time I was sitting with her that night. It had been the first one. I moderated somehow or another and kept a lid on it for a little while. And I drank that beer, and so anyway, get back to that June 18th date.
Something you should normally lead with on a first date is, by the way, I'm an alcoholic.
Yeah.
And then she says, you're the one for me.
Yeah. And I didn't ever... I didn't tell her anything about the pill problem. I just drank too much. And so back to that June 18th date. That girl's here at my house. My kids we put them to bed. Her daughter is with us too, and she's in bed with my daughter. My daughter had like a trundle bed, so the two girls are sleeping in the girls' bedroom. My son's asleep in the boys' in his room, and you kind of go in there and check on them. And I was sitting there drinking beer. I can tell you what I had on, man. I had a pair of Croc loafers and canvas loafers on. Not the rubbery ones with the holes in them, but the loafer looking ones. And I had a pair of short pants, cargo pants on. I had an orange tank top on. And I'm vaping then too. So I grab my vape and I tell her I'll be right back in a minute. And I go out the back door of the house, and it's dark. And I slip around the side of the house, and I go over there and I open up that door. They'd started locking the door, but they'd left a key out under a brick for me, so I could go in anytime I wanted to. And so I got the key out, and I opened up the door, and I went in the house, and I twinkle-toed back there. All the lights were out. It was quiet. And I walked back, and I opened up the desk drawer, or the dresser drawer, got the pill bottle out. I shook out a handful of them, put the lid back on it. I never took them all. I would just shake out some. I put the lid back on it. I put it back in there, shut the drawer, and when I turned around, there was a dude standing there with a pepper spray bottle, and he had it like 4 inches away from my face, and he hit me with that pepper spray. And he also, in one hand he had that, and the other hand he had a baseball bat. And then he started lighting into me with the baseball bat. Well, we were so close to one another, he really couldn't get me. He really couldn't get any kind of like power behind it. I wrestled with him. I got by him, and blew out the door. I didn't ever think he really got me well until the next day. I guess going out the door, he must have connected with me once with that baseball bat. Because the next day I had a huge big whelp and a bruise on my back that that's the only place I can say that I'd come from. What I did is I broke free of the dude, man, and I blasted out that door. My house, if I was leaving that house, my house would have been to the left, kind of catty corner. I didn't go home. I ran to the right. And in this neighborhood I've grown up in, like I said, I've spent 40 years in this neighborhood. And I know every backyard, pretty much every fence, every place. And I'd venture to say that when I'm on foot in this neighborhood, if I don't want to be caught, I'm not going to be caught. Now, there's an exception always, but I'm pretty well on my home turf. And I blasted out of there. And one of the things that came to me, too, to looking at this is that there were some times when I was a little kid and I had some bullies that were dealing with me, and I spoke about that stuff about not being able to speak my truth and not be able to tell these guys it was time for me to go home and different things like that. Well, I continued to have these issues with these bullies, and I got myself in a situation where these guys wanted to kick my ass. And I would leave school, and I would have to, my day-to-day for a while, remember, my daily routine of leaving junior high school was come out, look to make sure, let everybody else leave school so all the crowd got out.
Yeah.
So that then I could see, I had some visibility, and look out the door, make sure the coast is clear, and I would blast. I could walk to every school I went to from elementary, junior high, and high school. I walked home a lot, and I would run home. And I would run home a different route all the time because there was times I got caught and I'd get beat on, picked on, different stuff, spit in my hair. They never really hurt me bad. It wasn't like they were like really hurting me, but it hurt me. It hurt me anyway. And so I was doing that. Well, I remember the times of like when I'd see the guys, there'd be a time where I would get up on my toes running and like there was a cushion of air under me. I mean, you were like an inch from the crash too, man. Any little slip was going to put you in the pavement, and I'm running as flat out fast as I possibly can to keep these dudes from being able to catch me so that I could get home. And I had that same feeling that night as I left that house of running for my life as fast as I possibly could. I blasted out of there. Couldn't see shit. I'm almost doing it by feel. Like I said, this neighborhood, because he's got my eyes have been filled with that pepper spray. Once I got to a point where I could like slow down and knew that he wasn't like right behind me anymore, because I felt like I heard footsteps behind me for a while. I don't think in retrospect, I don't think that happened. But I got to a spot and I slowed down, man, and there was just mucus. My eyes are burning, my nose is burning, my mouth is burning. It's like my ears are burning. Everything is just awful. And it was like waves. I think my shirt was full of it. I remember taking off my shirt, that orange tank top I had on, took it off and put it in somebody's garbage. I went fishing around in people's backyards looking for a garden hose and was trying to spray that shit off of me. And I proceeded to walk around that night trying to, once more, and this is the one that hit me hard, of sitting there going, what the fuck am I going to do? Because I was caught. And now the thing about it is that this ain't the first time that guy caught me. Because 6 months before, I went in this same house, and this guy caught me. I was drunker and shit that night. He threw me to the ground and pinned me down on my stomach and put his knee in my back while he shouted to somebody else to call 911. And he said, he asked me, who are you? And when I told him my name, instantly when I told him my name, I felt the pressure come off of his knee. And he said, get out of here. And he only had to tell me once. The cops had already came. He made up a story. I come back in the house. I'm watching the cops come up over there, talking to him. He's doing all the gesturing and this and that, and like giving the, I don't know what happened, the shrugging shoulders thing. Turns out he had told him he didn't know who it was. And he actually tried to offer me some help a couple days later. He kept coming over and ringing my doorbell, trying to give me some help, but I couldn't, I couldn't answer the door or anything. He ended up going to tell my mom and dad on me. It's another one of those times of that shame, like that newspaper articles. But I went to rehab again, and I got my shit together, supposedly, but here I am caught again. And this time he wasn't going to let me, the knee pressure was not going to come off. It was pepper spray and ball bat. So I'm out running around, having no idea what to do, man. I even went to a friend's house that lives within walking distance and was throwing rocks at his window trying to wake him up. I didn't have my cell phone on me. I'd lost my vape. I'm jonesing for some nicotine. I'd ate some of the pills, and I had a buzz that was subsiding from the beer drinking earlier. So that, how we love it when our blood alcohol level is dropping. That's no fun either. And I walked around. I kept on coming back to the house and looking, and there was a patrol car in front of the house and a patrol car in the back of the house, and they had their headlights shined. So like if I was trying to get home, I would break those beams of light. And I would go walk off. I tried to wake up my buddy. I'd go someplace else. I even stood out here at one of these busy roads, man, thinking, if a semi truck come by here right now, I think if I'd just step in front of it, because I really, the shame and the guilt and the remorse and everything of what I'd just done and got caught doing. I was trying to think about what was going on with this girl that was at my house. I walked out the back door and fucking disappeared. She didn't know what happened. Hours go by. I don't have any idea what time it is. I keep coming back over here. Actually, I walked around and circled. I made a new circle back because I'm doing the I can't come up with the word. Being sneaky, coming back and doing different routes every time I would come and look. So I didn't want to get patterned or anything. And a fight broke out over here. And I walked right into it, man, and some people started fighting, a couple dudes, and there were some girls screaming and stuff, and I was like, I don't want to be anywhere around this, there's something like this is going to attract the cops, and I think that actually pulled the cops off my house, I think. And they left, and I come back in the house, and I'm sitting back here leaning against this chain link fence right back here, watching, and every light in the house is on, and it's late. I know it's late. And I can see people moving around. So I slip up beside the house, and two things surprised me real quick. One was that girl's car was still in the driveway. That surprised me. Second thing surprised me is my fucking parents' car was in the driveway. It just didn't dawn on me that would be the case. So I come back around here, and I'm watching, and I don't know what's going on, but there's a lot of commotion, and there's people moving around in the house. I can see through the curtains and stuff from all the way back here. And I sit down underneath that pine tree right there. It used to have a lot of limbs that came down and almost down to the ground, and I sat down over there up against the chain link fence and just pondering what the fuck to do. What do you do? I wanted to go in the house, but I didn't really want to go in the house. All them people was in. I didn't know who was in there. Didn't know what was going on. Just couldn't do anything. I was froze, and all of a sudden the back door comes open, and my dad steps out, and he's got 2 5-gallon buckets, and you can tell they're heavy. And he starts walking down the path with them that I am sitting right beside. There's stepping stones that come out, and he's walking like what we would say is carrying out the garbage path. That's what we walk out to do that. And he's got those, and I didn't know what they were, but I remember as he's coming by, man, I'm just curled myself up into a ball, trying to be as small as I can possibly be, man. I do not want to be seen, and I'm just hoping he'll walk past me. And what caught me was the sound of those buckets hitting the ground, and I could hear that they were full of broken glass. And he said, Dan, like in a big question mark, you know. Dan? Like, yeah. And he said, are you hurt? Are you okay? And those were not the words I was expecting him to say. And I told him that I wasn't hurt, and I really didn't know if I was okay, or I'm not really okay, or something. And the next thing I know, I felt him sit down. It breaks me up every time I talk about it. Next thing I know, he sit down next to me, and he put his hands on my knee, and he told me, he said, it's all going to be okay. He said, just come in, let's hit the sack. He said, let's come in, take a shower, hit the sack. We'll deal with this tomorrow. That's what I did. He got up, carried that buckets on out. I went in the house. What I'd found out was the guy who, instead of chasing me, and I don't know if he thought I came home or if he just did this just because, in retribution. I think he thought I came home is what I think. And he come and he raked out the side lights on both sides of my front door. I got a big round window in the front door. He busted that out. He entered my house. He took the ball bat to everything that was glass or anything he could bust up. This girl, and this again, I didn't know this at the time, but this girl that was here, she was hiding when she heard all that noise. She was in the bathroom and she heard all this. She thought it was gunshots when he come in with the ball bat, the busting and stuff. She didn't know what had happened. She goes and crouches down back in between the two kids' bedroom to protect those children from whatever monster had just come in the house that she had no idea about. All she knows is hours ago, or not hours ago, 15 minutes ago, I left. I ain't been seen. And then this noise comes in the front door and starts busting the hell out of everything. They meet in the hallway at the house face to face, neither one of them knowing the other, neither one of them having any idea why the other one is standing there. He's wanting to know where I'm at. She's clueless about where I'm at. He apparently at that point, she said he kind of like relaxed his body, his posture. He was really tense with the ball bat and everything, and he relaxed, like dropped the bat down to the side of his body, and he left. And he called the cops, and the cops came. She let him search the house. So obviously, I mean, she didn't know any better. I don't let the cops search my house, not without a warrant. They came in. My parents, she didn't know what to do. My cell phone's there. She picks it up. She calls my parents. They come over. The cops are searching the house. One of the other things where, knowing this higher power is looking out for you was they searched my entire house. They shined flashlights in my bedrooms, in the closets, and under the beds where those kids were sleeping, and those kids never woke up. They have no memory of the police searching that house looking for their father. They were spared that memory. I came in, looked at the tears in my mom's eyes and the fear. My dad has this calmness over him all the time that I just can't describe. There's just this always everything's going to be okay kind of thing. You could see that he was hurt and bothered, but he had this calmness. This girl was sitting on my bed with completely puffed up red eyes. She had been crying the whole time. I sat down with her. I took a shower. It turned out to be 2 a.m. It was about 2:15 the first time I saw a clock. It was about 9 o'clock when I left the house that night earlier. Took a shower, jumped in bed, did my best at going to sleep. Woke up the next morning, took a shower. It was a work day. Come out, walked out the back door, down that stepping stones, went over by that tree, lifted up a rock, grabbed the pills I'd placed there the night before, throwed a half a dozen of them in my gullet, swallowed them, stuck the rest of them in my pocket, and walked back in the house. And that AA book talks about the memory and the suffering of weeks or months ago, not being able to remember that. I couldn't remember that suffering from last night. I was stuffing it that hard that I sit out there and took the same fucking medication that I, grabbed the same thing, grabbed for the same relief is what put me in the pinch that I was in the night before. And I go in there and I get those, and I arouse everybody, and we're going to go, and she's going to take care of my kids today because I'm going to work. I put her in my vehicle so that when she left, if he stopped somebody, it would be her and not me. And I took her car, and we went out the road here and met and swapped back again. Kids are walking around. Everything's all busted the fuck up. And they're going, what's up with that? You know, they're going, the front window's busted out, and I got a big piece of styrofoam taped over it, and pieces of plastic and different things taped over different pieces of glass, and stuff is busted up, and I'm going, oh, don't worry about that, you know, let's just, you know, nothing to see there. Man, that's a long story.
And one thing too, you know, when we have those bottom moments in our career and we have no idea it's coming tonight, and I always warn my patients, you don't know, you have no idea. You left the house at 9 o'clock, pop a couple pills, be back, watch the ball game, whatever you're going to do. 2, 5, 6 hours later, your whole life has completely turned to shit.
Right. Yep. Completely. Man, I tried to go on with my life that day. That next day. You know, my mom and dad knew what the deal was. The minute that girl called my mom, she knew exactly what had happened again.
You try to go about your normal life, but when you know the consequences are coming,
yeah,
you get this pounding in the back of your head when you're trying to do normal life and you know you've been found out. You know something's coming.
Yeah.
What happened?
So a few days go by, you know, and I'm doing this, and I get to somebody, you know, I actually was able to talk to a couple people about it, and it comes that I should contact a lawyer. And so I'd just been through this divorce, so I contacted my divorce lawyer, and she hooked me up with a criminal attorney in her same place, and he gave me advice and told me what was going to happen. And he said, you know, cops are going to come on and talk to you, and he gave me the whole lowdown about how they're going to put a warrant out for your arrest, and he really shot me straight. He gave me some really sound advice through that, and that's exactly what happened. I actually had to go on the lam for a while. I went and stayed with that girl for a while because he said you don't want to get caught, because if they arrest you, we don't know how long it'll take us to get you out. Mm-hmm. But if we can arrange for this warrant to come out and we turn you in and pay the bail and do all that, like which it all happened just exactly like it is supposed to.
Walk yourself down there all nice dressed. I'm here. And
that's what I did. I walked in and I walked down, and they arraigned me and charged me with that stuff. And I stood in front of that judge, and he told me that I was going to go to the sentencing guidelines in state Indiana were 6 to 20 years in the Indiana Department of Corrections. And that sounded like, you know, the gates of hell kind of thing, like Bill talks about in the book, when that guy said 6 to 20 years. And then they threw the cuffs on me, and my mom is in the back of the courtroom crying, and they walked me to the elevator and take me down the deal, man. You don't know if you're coming back out of that or not. The lawyer promised me that I'd come out the other side, and I did. I went down, they fingerprinted me, do all the other short shit that they do when they intake you, just like you're going to jail. And then my bail ticket came in, and they pointed at a door down there that had a crash bar on it, you know, that you could just walk out. And they pointed at that, and I was like, that? And they said, yep. And when I pushed that door open, man, it was daylight, and I was out. And Mom was sitting out there. The lawyer even told Mom where to park, and so she was sitting right outside that door, parked on the street, waiting for me to come out. She got in the passenger seat, and I came home and started that path of going to this thing and doing this plea bargain deal where you go in and, you know, they didn't want, you know, right off the bat, they really weren't going to send me with that 20, but they were pretty much sticking on the 6 years right off the bat. And I didn't want any help. I've been to AA, and I knew something in my gut would allow me to, you know, that I should go back to AA, and do something, you know, there was something pulling me that direction. Because frankly, I just didn't have any other thing that I knew I could do, you know.
When I hit my bottom, I got nothing else in the deck. Okay, I'll play that card. I'll go to AA.
Yeah, that's the only thing I knew. But I couldn't, man, and I joke around about this a little bit, but there really is a little truth in this, is that I felt like I'd punched all the corners, cut all the corners off of my AA card. You know, when you were a kid in Scouts, you get this totem chip where you could carry a knife or a pocket knife or a hatchet, and if you fucked up with it, they would cut a corner off, and if they cut all the corners off your card, you couldn't carry again until you re-earned that right, you know. And that's kind of like the mental thing that went through me about, like, I'd punched all my AA cards, you know. I can't come back to there. And a friend of mine was doing a meditation meeting. I kept on seeing it, being him advertising it on Facebook, or just talking about it, not advertising it really. He just was mentioning it on his Facebook feed. And I went to it once, and I couldn't go in. I sat out there and parked, and I couldn't go. And this guy actually used to sponsor me. He's my first sponsor. And finally, I walked up into there, and it was full of people from I knew from AA, and there was some other people too that were just there to meditate, that just normals or whatever you want to call it, or maybe now today I have a new term for them, TSSR candidates.
That's an interesting little detail. It never occurred to me when I heard your story before. We're very careful about using social media tools to not violate anonymity principles. But if he hadn't put on there that he had that meditation meeting, where would you have gone?
That led me right back to AA.
Where would you have gone? That was a vital brick in your journey.
That's why I always talk about it. Yeah, to know that
technology can be helpful.
Yep, that opened the door and allowed me to come back in a soft way, right? And
somebody you knew.
Because then I went in there and I got to talking to them, and then I could go back. They were like, you should go, because I started to let them in on what was going on too. That was the first place I was able to actually say something to somebody about where I would predict I was at. It took a little while before I was able to do that. Went in there with how are you doing? I ain't seen you in a long time. Oh, I'm good. I'm good.
Just facing 20 years.
Yeah. So and this is more of this timeline. It frankly doesn't make sense, and it doesn't add up, and I really don't know how it went. There's a whole lot of that back there, some veils around it that I don't really know. I know it's the truth, and I know it's my story, but I don't know, the timeline doesn't seem to be accurate. But I was going to court however often I had to do that, and the lawyer would tell me, and we would go back, and I never went to court except for that one time, but I'd have to go down there and show up, and I'd sit on a bench, and he'd come and get me after a few minutes, and he would come and take me in this little private room and tell me where we were at. And it was all very gamey, because I wasn't in on the deal at all. They were in there having these discussions about my future, and I wasn't involved in them. And we was talking about stuff, and he was, some friends had said something to me about, you'll just be, they'll just put you on home incarceration or something like that. And I've, broached that with them, and they was laughed at me, he like, yeah, and I'll say something. And then he'd come back and he'd like, yeah, no, they're not going to let you do home incarceration because you was breaking into that house across the street from your home. And your whole neighborhood, frankly, wants you to go to jail.
Yeah.
And he had me convinced, like I say, that my lawyer, the judge, and the prosecutor all had me convinced I was going to do some jail time. There was no way out. It was just a matter of how much. We talked about a work release program they entertained for a little bit. And this whole time I'm playing sober, right? And when I went in front of the judge one time, I actually got to see him, and my lawyer told the judge that I was going to go to rehab, and the judge said, well, I don't know if Mr. Reeves needs to go to rehab or not. If he wants to, that's okay with me, but it has no bearing on what we're going to do with him. Well, okay, but I went anyway, and I started pretending, I started playing sober. But one of the things I was doing is every day that I had a court appointment, I would get them in the morning most of the time. They'd be like 9 o'clock in the morning or whatever. I'd be down there. I'd take the whole day off of work. As soon as I left there, I would make sure that my schedule was clear, and I would go to the liquor store and I'd get enough. I wasn't breaking in houses, stealing pills. I didn't have any of that anymore, but I would drink myself to oblivion those nights. And it was always like trying to get that perfect amount where I wouldn't have no left over. But I had a sufficient quantity to get me through the night and get me smashed, so I could drown that guilt, shame, and remorse around that court date, man. Because I just felt horrible. I mean, golly, I held that shame of going down there and doing that. And frankly, like, that's not me. When I looked at me, when I went down there and around them elements that are down there doing the same thing I was doing, those people were not me. So I did that time after time after time, and I was trying to play sober, and I was going to meetings, and but I really wasn't doing anything. I hadn't gotten a new sponsor. I still called my old sponsor my sponsor, but I was just trying to manage this. I fell into a step study where some guys were doing this at the same place that the meditation was at, and that was really helping me. It felt like I was getting some traction doing that step study with those guys, and then it fell through, and it wasn't happening anymore. It happened to be happening on Tuesday nights. For a long time, I couldn't find anything to do on Tuesday nights. It was odd. Good meetings on these other nights of the week and stuff, but Tuesday was always a problem. And I had that step study, and the step study collapsed. Now I didn't have nothing to do on Tuesday nights again. And it was, meetings kept me alive. I was either going to be drinking or I was at a meeting. I was playing sober at a meeting, or I was hiding out drinking. Those are the two things I did. And like, I had my kids, but they were scared to stay with me by this point. I didn't have them much, but they got pushed on me a little bit, and they didn't like it, and I didn't like it. But so I'm sitting and going to work, and I've let this friend at work with me know about what's going on, and he's sober and not by much. He he had had his troubles, and I remember disparaging him back when I was still drinking, and he was getting in a lot of trouble with his drinking, and I would look at him, and I'm like, they should fire that dude, man. He's drunk, but I'd be right across the street getting beer and going home. But I didn't look. I looked at him. He had a problem. I didn't. So about now, I seen this, and I told him, and I talked to him, and he kept on telling me about this meeting on Tuesday nights that I should come to. And I really didn't, I got this, right? Bob Earl says that. You're going to offer me something that works for you. When you bring me something that works for you, that helps you, and you say, hey, man, would you like to have some of this? I go, no, man, I'm okay. I got this. And that's what I was doing with him. Then that step study fell apart, and I was really searching for something. There was some gnawing in my heart to find something, because they're still down here talking about, and we'd come down at some point, like I said, I don't know how the timeline worked, but they were finally come down to this thing where they were offering me 3 years and I'd serve a year and a half. That still wasn't something. And in the back of my head, and I didn't tell anybody this, I've spoke about before since then, is that if that was actually going to happen to me, I really was not going to go to jail for a year and a half. I was planning on some other checkout. What if that meant run or kill myself or do something? I wasn't willing to go to prison. I wasn't going to do that. I was going to find some other way out. And so this guy's talking to me, and he invites me to go to it, and I won't. And then finally I ended up saying to him one day, he'd quit inviting me. He's like, well, okay. And one day I was at work, and I asked him, I said, hey, man, is that meeting, you still going to that meeting tonight? And he said, yeah. And he goes, and I saw him, I still remember this come over his face. He goes, this like concern, like, oh man. And I was like, what? Here's the one night I get the balls up to say I'm willing to go, and then he's going to come off with something that ain't going to work. And he says, it's at some dude's house this time. The church is busy, and we're doing it at this dude's house. And I was like, can I still go? He said, yeah, you can still go. So we followed one another over there, and it ended up being in Brian's basement. And I walked down into that meeting that very first night, and I was scared to death. I kind of like to tell that story. It's Christmas time. It was before Christmas. And then we were with this house, man, and this place is decked out like Christmas forever, man. There's flying reindeer in the yard, all the bushes. There's all kinds of stuff. You walk in the house, I saw at least, without even looking, 2 fully decorated Christmas trees.
At least.
And a table next to me that had a train going around its Christmas village. Like all the decorations in the house have been removed and replaced with Christmas. And I was like, whoa, and I walk in and I'm like, where is the chick in this house? Who?
Inside joke.
Yeah. And I did. I looked over at, and when I found out who it was, I remember I looked over, and this is not politically correct at all, but I looked over at George, and I whispered to him, I said, is this dude gay or what? And it turns out that he is, and he actually, knowing this guy actually changed my whole, I was afraid everybody wasn't like me, and he really changed my thoughts in that manner, and I think that's a little bit of it was interesting, because I'll never forget walking into my very first Spiritual Underground meeting, and it was basically a Christmas wonderland. But we got down in the basement, and I can still remember pretty much, and I could probably sit around, and I'm not going to do it, but I can almost tell you where everybody was sitting. I can remember where you were sitting, I remember where Darren was sitting, Brian, I can remember where Eddie was sitting, a whole bunch of people, Tim, a bunch of people who were sitting in there. I can remember exactly where they were at in there. And when the meeting started, people started sharing in a way that I had not heard in a meeting that I'd ever been to. And I instantly started relating and started feeling something there. And I started going back to Tuesday. I went to that meeting from that point forward to now.
I've got to interject this here. So everybody's looking for the God miracle, like the burning bush bullshit, right? That's not how God works, man. There's so many imperceptible small moves, and I'm going to give you a couple that I don't think you realized. Your friend at work was in my group.
Right.
So if I'd not shown up to be a counselor and chosen this path, he wouldn't have been there to help you. But what's really odd is that I rarely, especially back then, invited people to my home group. And this person was struggling, and I have a heart, sometimes to a fault. And it's hard as a counselor to keep that professional life separate from your recovery life, right? Because you're going to run into clients at meetings, but you don't want to invite them to your freaking home group on purpose, right? But my heart is like, nah, this dude needs help. And so I rarely did that back then. So it's just even a miracle that he was part of Spiritual Underground at that time. Yeah. To be able to be there to bring you in. Yeah. I mean, that's all God. I mean, that's behind the scenes stuff that we dumbass humans with our egos to completely miss.
Yep. So I started going at me, and you guys were talking to me and stuff, and I'm giving you the same bullshit that I was giving everybody else about. I'm fine. I'm good. I had some recovery, but I lost it. I'm back again. No big deal.
Yeah, just one of your friends you brought the other night, a few months ago, I was talking about how bad we are all off, and he was going, whoa, I'm not that bad. And I was like, oh, okay.
Yeah, we've heard
that
before.
attitude we come in with, right? I'm dying. My whole life is in flames, but I'm not like you, right?
Right.
Not as bad as you are.
Yeah. Yep, and I did that, and then what happened then was, we're still playing this game, and this court game is what I mean about this little, I don't know. There really is something very gamemanshipy about this
systems
court
and
deal,
institutions.
This thing about going in and not really being a part of what you're getting, and you're just getting fed by these other
Cog
people.
in the machine, baby.
What you are going to get,
just a number.
And I almost and there's times I sit outside the door, I could hear them in there behind this one thing laughing and shit, and I'm like, this is not funny.
And they're talking about your future.
I'm assuming they're talking about me, And so it was a Tuesday. I had a court date on a Tuesday, and there's a guy that sat in here, and I had already started stalking a sponsor. I knew that if I had any hope for whatever reason, I didn't know this. It was just gut stuff, right? Saying I knew it is bullshit, really. But there was something in me telling me that this is a potential. This is someplace I need to be. And so I started here, and they were doing a sponsorship statement where guys raised their hand. Everybody, we say, Spiritual Underground believes in sponsorship is a pathway to recovery through 12 steps, Alcoholics Anonymous. And, all men who are available and willing to sponsor a guy through steps right now, please raise your hand. And people would raise their hands, So I started stalking a sponsor in there. The guy that I really listened to and heard and kept on relating to time after time after time didn't ever seem to raise his hand. I watch him, and he wouldn't. But there's some other guys that shared some good shit, too. And they would, So I'm looking and I'm watching, but I'm thinking maybe if I just keep on coming back, this guy will eventually raise his hand, right? And he don't. And again, the timeline doesn't work, so I don't really understand how. It seemed like it was a long time, but it couldn't have been, because it's Christmas to my sobriety date was January the 15th, so it can't fucking be that fucking long, I don't know how. I don't know. I just don't know. I don't really care.
Time is very long in early recovery.
Yeah. Yeah, there couldn't have possibly been that many Tuesdays between then and there and there and there. I don't know how. But anyway, so I'm looking for the next guy, but I have a court date on a Tuesday, and I couldn't do my normal drinking thing that I do every Tuesday, or every time I had to go to court. And one of the things was I wanted to go to this Tuesday night meeting, and what little goofy thought in my head is that if I miss that meeting, that'd be the night that sumbitch raised his hand, and I'm not there. And so I suffered all day long, and I remember that, of like white knuckling all fucking day long of not drinking and not, and just waiting until 7:30. And I walked in there, and they did this thing called a burning desire. And that night I had a fucking burning desire. I've been carrying that. I was done holding it. And it, again, I get emotional talking about it. And I sit there, and for the very first time I told that group what the hell was going on with me. And I was honest about it, and I poured it out on the fucking floor. And, they said stuff to me like, no matter what, we'd be with you. If you end up in jail, we'll come see you. Whatever's going on, man, you end up at home, you need a meeting, we'll bring one to you. And another guy, I remember saying something that said, I never have, we really don't, or he said, I don't really know anybody that's ever worked at 12 Steps to Alcoholics Anonymous that actually spent any significant time in prison. And, well, I will. You're getting ready to meet one, if I ever did it. And because I'm always going to be the exception, right? And after that meeting, I got up and we did a fellowship time around it. But one thing that changed in that meeting was right after the meeting, the guy who never raised his hand made a beeline to me pretty quickly and started engaging me and talked to me for a few minutes and said, I think he looked me right in the eye and said, if you're up to it, I want to sponsor you. And that kicks me too. Following up with that, I want to sponsor you thing. So this guy I'm watching the whole time, never raises his hand, walks up to me and tells me that after I pour my heart out. But he followed it up with a, except for or a but. I want to sponsor you, but, and he gave me these ground rules. He said, I want you, I remember this like a back, and I'd still like to do this. Like, well, you got a big book? Because I do that too. You got a big book? Yeah, I got a big book. This guy writing in it? Yeah, I got it all highlighted up. Get a new one. And like, huh? And, get a new big book. Call me every day between 1 and 3. I joke about that too. I called him at 2 o'clock the next day because that's exactly between 1 and 3. And could we meet? He had an opening on Tuesday nights right after this meeting. Was I available then? I said yeah to all that stuff, not knowing really if I was or not. Just to clue you in, and if you don't know already, that guy is Christopher, who's sitting across the table from me right now. And again,
I was part of that God moment, so I've got to give you the other side of it. We say stupid stuff like God works through people, and then when it happens, we're like, huh, what?
Yeah.
But your story was gut level honest. It was like not just the facts. It was like, I'm going to pour my heart out and let these guys know I'm dying over here. And I had this surge of God energy come through me that was like, sit me up in my fucking chair, that said, help this fucking man. Throw him a lifeline. It's almost as if you were on a ship and the guy is falling out in the raging seas and everybody's just standing there watching him. And I'm like, fucking throw him a fucking line. That power, that energy, that voice, I heard it loud and clear, went right through me. And it wasn't a beeline, it was a bullet. I bulleted it over to you. And I think
I remember you coming to me. You intimidated me a little bit. I
said straight up, I just think, like I said, I'm going to sponsor you.
I think you did. Yeah.
I don't think I went through any foreplay.
Yeah. No, I don't think there was either. But there was some afterplay of what needed to be, what was expected. Because I know it went through the big book stuff and the meeting time and the call me thing.
Which is the result of great sponsorship. And I really, anybody out there that's in recovery, I hope you have a good sponsor that has you have standards that you expect to be met. We're not going to waste time.
Yeah.
My seat's valuable.
Here's the expectations. Yeah. Set them up front. That way, if they fall.
And to give your guy directions right from the get-go. I get so many patients in my class.
I needed that badly.
Oh, you got a sponsor last night? What did he tell you to do? He didn't really say anything. Yeah. Not even to call you every day? Not even that. Give your guy directions right from the get-go. Yeah. A lot of people are afraid of that, right? They don't want to scare him away. Right. Well, I might scare him away. Heck with that. If he wants help, he wants help. If he doesn't, he doesn't. Let's get busy.
I actually look at it as that, a little weeding out. Man, if I scare you off that easy, well, then you're not going to do the rest of this work if you're going to run that fast.
Never going to do a 4-step, that's for sure.
I'll play with you. We'll find somebody who really wants this thing.
So tell us about your journey in recovery now.
So then, we started doing this thing, and and again, the timeline just doesn't work out. I don't understand how it all happened exactly time-wise, but we started meeting and doing this stuff, and I remember one specific night sitting in a Starbucks, and I know I was disengaged that night. And it was real early. It's while we was doing like first step kind of stuff. It's real early. You gave me assignment, rebuild story, underline, and everything I could relate to a question and be prepared to talk about it next time we meet. So it was one of them kind of real early ones, and I remember being totally up in my head, and you were talking to me, and I wasn't really listening, and I know I wasn't. And I can remember, and I can do it on this floor too because it sounded just the same. It went. And you got up and said, "I don't think you're really into this, man," and you were leaving. You picked up your shit, and man, I remember the fucking panic that went over top of me at that moment, man. It was like, no, sit down, come back, and man, and it really did. It jerked a knot in my tail and got myself I was still daydreaming about it all up into that moment, and whatever, and that chair squeaking on the floor, I can still remember that noise of getting my attention and thinking you were bailing on me, because that was my lifeline, man. That was the only one I could see. And I speak about this, that I was backed into this corner where they were down there at that 3 years, serve a year. And don't worry, Dan, it's only a year and a half. It'll fly by. I had a house, property, job. All that shit was going to be gone if I spent any time gone. And my whole house cards was going to disappear, and I was backed into a corner, and the only freaking escape route, the only tunnel that seemed to be offered to me was the damn tunnel that was 12 steps. It was the only thing that seemed to, there was nobody else was bringing me anything else. There was not like I was sitting around going, well, I don't know which one to do. We've got these proposals on the table. I'm going to try to figure out which one I'm going to do. I'm really waiting to talk to my lawyer about which one would be the best. I really didn't. I just saw that as my only fucking escape route. Like a fucking rat in a maze that sees the light at that tunnel and going, well, I don't know what's out there, but it's better than what's right here. And
that's when I did the steps for myself. I had no other options. I think when you're painted into a corner, it's the greatest blessing of your recovery.
It was my only thing, and so that gets to be this blur, and I remember writing and doing, you giving me the directions and stuff and going through and doing a 4-step, but it's real foggy, I remember doing it. I remember us doing my 5th step at your house. I remember how the impact that it had on me. I can remember that evening plain as day. I remember doing 6 and 7, and I remember we went. Finally, I was able to go to Gethsemane one time, and I redid my 7th step up on the hill, and it was a really windy day, man. When we were bracing each other as we was doing the circle prayer up there, and when I did my 7th step prayer at the top of that hill, the wind stopped. And it's like, and you felt it. I felt it. The hair stood up on my arms, and like I sit up there and did that, and the wind stopped, and it got still as shit for a minute, like scary still. And then after a few more minutes, the wind picked right back up, and it was back to blustering again. Y'all were all down by the cars and all that kind of stuff. Obviously, going through the 8-step prayers and all the work that we do with that, I'm not going to go into the detail of it, but I do recall it. But it's all like a little bit of a blur. But one of the things I remember is starting to get down the men's path. And I remember, and it's almost cliche-ish, I was sitting there and I was talking to you on the telephone or something about, man, Christopher, something is just different. Just fucking different, man. I just feel light. And I feel, something has shifted. I just feel so good here lately, man. And you said something, you go, so are you about halfway through? I'm like, halfway through telling you this, you fucking asshole. I'm in the middle of pouring my heart out here. And you're asking me if I'm through. Well, it came apparent real quick, it was this, before we were halfway through in the 9-step promises is what you were referring to. And yes, I was. It was before I was halfway through, and the promises started happening for me, and you've encouraged me from the get-go to never like let up on that, and to never there's some things where it's once in a while where you told me like in my other life where I need to let off the accelerator pedal in some things, but you always encouraged me to keep my foot on the accelerator pedal when it come to my recovery and participating in what I was doing. And I get touched so much because so many cool things has happened, and I'm going to try to go through some of that too, because I talked about what happened. And then when I share with somebody else and they're at the other end of the podcast table, I want to make sure, and I've already done a little podcast on that, but on the miracles that happened for me as a result of this stuff. But I kept my foot in the deal, and you guys made it so easy. I was welcomed in. We lift each other up in a way. This group of guys lifts each other up in a way that if you don't feel that, something is deeply, I can't even say that. I would say something's deeply wrong with you if you can't feel what we do when we come together the way we come together, like we have in this group that we're a part of today.
So we get these objective parties that come in for a birthday night, and that's our perspective on what we have. And my mom came to my birthday celebration this past week, and she leans over to me and she says, "Is it always this loud?" Right before the meeting started. I said, "Yeah, that's called the juice."
Yeah, that is another thing.
If you ain't got that in your meeting, run. Don't walk to the next one.
Yep. That's another thing I've heard from people that come in that are new, and they talk about how noisy it is before the meeting. Yeah,
with a lot of laughter, which is what Scott
what
L. calls the sound effect of recovery.
Right.
A lot of laughter.
Yep. So during that time, and it's completely unrelated, because the courts don't know I'm doing this. I am talking to my lawyer, and maybe he did slip some seeds in that direction, but I'm really not too open with him because I think this is all hocus pocus kind of stuff, and I'm not really like blowing off about the 12 steps. Now, I will beat a 12-step drum today for anybody that will listen, but I wouldn't then. Mm-hmm. I was still a little bit like ashamed of it in a way, and although it was working for me, I'm still not ready to tell you about it, especially as an outsider. And you and somebody else, the person who was in this house that night, that gal, kept on encouraging me to chase this home incarceration route, and I kept on telling y'all the same thing, man. They've already told me no, and they said go for it one more time. And so I went for it one more time, except for you gave me the caveat of maybe doing my home incarceration someplace other than here, because that was the kicker, was that, the proximity to and the neighbors being down visiting the prosecutor telling me they wanted me to be in jail and everything too. And I proposed that to my lawyer, and he kind of laughed at me. I can still remember him doing it. I hated doing it. It was hard to do, to call him up and ask for that, because I was like, this is just like, just felt fruitless. And so he sure put that air out there that it was a waste of time too, but he'd ask again. And it was a couple of weeks later, and he called me on the phone, and I didn't hear anything from him. And some people were saying, haven't you heard anything from the lawyer? And I'm going, no. And why don't you contact him? I'm like, I don't want to. And I hadn't heard from him in a little while. And he called me up one day, and he said, I got some good news for you. He said they're going to allow you to do this home incarceration And he gave me he proposed right there. He said, 1 year, he said, we're going to be sentenced to 3 years. He said, 1 year is going to be home incarceration. Then you'll have a year of probation. And then the other year will be put on the shelf pending successful completion of those other 2. And, man, right out of the blue, man. And it was the same. I didn't speak about that, but the night that you said you was going to sponsor me and I walked out of that building, man, and something made my eyes go skyward. I don't know what I believe, this higher power thing. I certainly didn't have what I have now then. But I walked out of that building and I looked skyward knowing something was working in my favor. Something was working for me. And the same thing when that happened and they offered me that, and boom. Prison went off the table, and I was looking at not having to go to prison, and I was going to get to stay home. And I didn't know what all that meant or how it was going to work, but we walked down that path, man, and the weight that was lifted from that single thing of knowing that wasn't where I was going was unreal, man. I couldn't call enough people and tell them. And, and some people are like, I went down and we started working with my mom, and I was going to go. I said something about that pain pill thing, but she'd stopped him according to what I understood, and even with that old thing, I still was looking for him in her house, even though I wasn't supposed to be doing them. I was still looking for him, and I wasn't finding any, so I thought she'd stopped too, and so I made plans to do the home incarceration in her house, and the courts agreed to that and everything. So when I filled out the paperwork and everything, I put down her address. That's where I was going to do my home incarceration. And when you go down and you do this kind of thing, you go down and they take you in this back room and set you down. And you sign all these agreement papers about all the stuff it's going, that you're agreeing to all this crap. And I'm reading through it, and I'm by myself. And I had some people from AA supporting me out in the courthouse, actually. So it really touched me that they showed up for me, which continued to happen all the time. And I sit down, man, and I'm looking at this paperwork, and I'm sitting in it, and it says you will serve home incarceration and a week before I almost skipped forward to that. A week before I was getting ready to clean out the bedroom at Mom and Dad's house so that I could move in there. And I went over to do that, and I was going to clean it out, and I was going to start moving some of my clothes in the closet and prepare, because I didn't know, like, when the home incarceration thing happened, if I was going to walk out of the courthouse with the ankle bracelet on or what the deal was. And I walked in, and my mom was in the position that I'd seen before of her nodding out, her chin down on her chest, and a bottle of prescription medication next to her, and I freaking panicked. I knew I couldn't stay sober in there. I knew right off that this was not going to fucking work, but I didn't, the agreement and everything had already been talked about. I hadn't actually sat down to sign it, and I remember walking out there and like, Mom, they both, where are you going? Where are you going? I thought you were going to. I was like, no, got to go, and I just boogied on them, and I called you.
Yeah, I'll never forget that phone call. You were in extreme panic.
Yeah. And I did not know what to do, man. And my court date was like 2 days later. And you just told me I was going to have to, couldn't go back to the till right now, man. We're going to ride this out. And you gave me one piece of advice, which I thought was very weak advice, was to pray for my higher power to support my recovery no matter what that is. And, man, I thought you got to come up with something better than that. But that's all it was, kind of like when the 12 steps was the tunnel at the light at the end of the tunnel thing. Okay, what you told me to do up to this point
I
has
also
worked.
told you that was my experience, strength, and hope, because every single time I've been down to nothing in my recovery, and I needed something for my recovery, if I ask my higher power for it, it delivers like gunshot fast.
Yeah.
Right? Pray for that new SS Camaro in my front yard, not going to show up. But praying for something for my recovery, fast.
Well, that's what I did, and as shallow and hollow as it felt, I did that. And when I sit there to sign those papers beforehand, I'm reading through that paperwork, and it said, "You have been sentenced 3 years, 1 year home incarceration to be served at," and it had my home address on it, not my parents' address on it. And of course, the rest of it said 1 year for probation, all that. And in that window, I had completely forgot every bit of that. I panicked. I thought they fucked up. I thought they made a mistake, that I was going to have to fix. And this is going to suck to tell them that they made this mistake. And I'm actually going to send myself to the place. I'm going to tell them, correct them, and send them to the place that I know I can't stay sober at. And so same thing, man. I walked out of there. That was another blinding, my mind was I was so in my head during the actual sentencing and the gavel and the stuff where you go up and actually say it and they record it and all that, because you did it back in the back room, the signing, and then you go up in front of the judge and he tells you what the deal is. And I don't even remember that. I have no recollection of standing in front of that judge that day, really. There's a little foggy memory. Walked out of that place, man, and once again, I called you. And and I said that they'd fucked up, and they put the wrong address on that paperwork, and you laughed. And I didn't think it was real funny. And it's the first time that you uttered those words that we tease about all the time now. You said, "You know what that is, don't you?" And for a while I wanted to tell you what it was and give you some kind of sound reasoning that I could come up with about what it was. But you reminded me what I've been praying about since the few days ago, my visit at my mom's house, that my higher power support me in my recovery. And I share this too, as I let this word out around town and around my AA circles. I had a number of people in AA tell me that this is a program of honesty, and I needed to go down there and tell them they had made a mistake. And my sponsor told me doing that would be undoing God's work. So we walked that out, man. And I could do we're on 2 hours right now. I could do a whole hour on the home incarceration experience itself.
To me, that's the difference between people who've had a true spiritual awakening and those that are still asleep. Being present to see God's work and actually knowing for what it is a spiritual awakening. I obviously have a group of people who are brand new and they're completely asleep. And I'll try and point out instances to them and say, you know what that is, or you see that, and they're just like, yeah, the lawyer made a fucking mistake. That's all that is. The judge fucking screwed up. Yeah, that's all that is. I'm gonna run with it. Oh, so you're gonna make that your higher power?
Yeah.
You're gonna make the judge or the lawyer's mistake your higher power that saved your life. Talk about asleep.
Yep. And because of that, those lessons like that, I can, now I'm aware, and when I see that kind of stuff happen in other people's life, it's the same thing. It's just the opposite. And it's a gift today to be able to go, no, man, that is not what's going on. Look at it from this perspective, and you can almost always turn somebody what looks like some kind of coincidence, accident, anomaly, and go, no, that is not what's going on if we have the right perspective and can see these things like that. And I've got just a list of them, and and I don't know that you remember, and it seems like we've talked about a little bit about this miracle list. I recall you suggesting that I start making a list of these things that were happening in my life that seemed that were miracles, that were unexplainable by anything else. So I started that, and I carry it with me today, and I have it printed out for me today, because I will, just like you told me. If I didn't keep this list, I wouldn't remember much of this stuff, or it would come in and out. Because when I come back and I have an opportunity to revisit this stuff, I go, oh yeah, I would have forgot that one. And we talked earlier about how many times my name had been in the newspaper. Mm-hmm. You jaywalk in New Albany, your name goes in the newspaper. There is a big piece of the local newspaper that has everybody who has been processed at any level. For the first time ever, here I do this. I do commit something that's felony stuff, and my name never hits the newspaper, man. I watch for that, watch for it. Never once did it come in, And like I said earlier about my kids being spared that memory of the cops looking around in the house, my parents were spared that of one more time, little Dan's name being in the paper. Over his shenanigans again. I talked about the sponsor who doesn't raise his hand. Talked about the 6 to 20 years in prison that turned into that 3-year sentence, and then to top that off, I was sentenced to a year of home incarceration. I got off in 9 months. So I didn't even serve the whole year. Now, I will tell you that 9 months is a long time to be on home incarceration. I really don't know anybody that's been on home incarceration. I've never spoken to somebody that's been on home incarceration that length of time. Most people are 30 days, 2 weeks, 90 days maybe. And there's a blessing in that too, When other people are talking in early recovery about getting invited, had to go to a brother's wedding or other various things that like the family Memorial Day party where everybody's drinking and all the different things that we're tempted to have to walk into, all those were taken off of my plate for 9 months while I worked the steps. And I said, can't go. That really was, and I've shared this too. You get this thing not happen to you. I had this, I did this thing that caused these consequences to be on me that looked like the worst thing could ever happen to a dude was getting caught breaking into that house, and it turns out to be the best fucking thing that ever happened to me. I wouldn't have the life I have today had I not broke in that house. That's crazy to talk about. At least that's the way I look at it. I don't think or also maybe have been some other consequence that did that. The lady, see if I go through this, and I'm going to run a little bit long on my podcast. I guess I get the liberty to do that.
It's your mic.
Well, do you know what the thing is that most people run out of gas, and I don't real easy.
He gets stronger as he goes. Let me say something about your home incarceration, because you were never really on home incarceration.
I really wasn't.
You were allowed to work. You were allowed to go to meetings. You were allowed to pick up your kids and do all that stuff.
I was getting ready to talk
You
about
just had that heavy bracelet on your ankle. That
was another miracle, was that for home incarceration. Normally they lock people down for 15 to 30 days when you walk in the door, because you really had to serve some real home incarceration. And then they'll let you go to work and stuff after that. And they assess you to see what kind of where you're at. So I went into my first day and did that, and you had advised me to write down put a meeting a day or more on a piece of paper and all the stuff I was doing, man. And I had this big sheet of stuff I was doing, man, and it was really, then again, just like asking that lawyer to go for the home incarceration pitch one more time just felt fruitless. Coming down there with this whole list of stuff and going, I know I'm on home incarceration, but I'm a busy dude and I got a lot to do, and here it all is. And but I did that in the humblest way I could possibly do it. And I remember old Jim, he looked at it, and I see him, and he's looking down through the glasses on his nose, and he's looking up at me, and he's looking down at this sheet, and he sets it down, and he crosses his arm on the table, and he goes, "Give me just a minute." And he grabs the telephone, and he calls up, and he says this gal's name, and I think I'm just going to say her name, because she touches me, I just say her first name. He says, "Janine, Mr. Reeves is here with me. We need to speak with you for a minute." And she said, "Okay, okay, see you in a minute," and hung up the phone. Now, I had no idea what this person was, who it was, why we needed to talk to her. It looked like, that he was going up the ladder. And I was thinking, oh, fuck. And after a minute, around the corner come this petite blonde lady who turned out to be an angel in my life. She come around the corner and she talked to me, and she started interviewing me to some extent and asking me what was going on. By now I'm getting some traction and some recovery, even somehow. Like I said, this timeline, I don't know how it doesn't really work, but she looked at my paper and she turned around and she said, "Worst thing we could do for him is stop his meetings right now." And she said, "Let him do all this stuff." And the schedule that they had you fill out was in a carbon copy triplicate thing. There wasn't even close to enough room on that piece of paper for me to put all my stuff down on. I was writing in little bitty letters. I went home and I took their sheet. I went home and made my own out on Excel and filled out my own sheet and took it to them as a proposal next time and gave it to them in copies so that I could fit all the stuff I was doing. And say, for a guy who was on home incarceration, I wasn't hardly home at all. I slept at home, and that was all. And Janine ended up being a really touching person.
Easy to see that when she came in, that's your angel there, but also him being tapped on the shoulder. You know how easy that would have been for him to cross his arms and say no.
Nope.
And something in him said,
yeah, I hadn't thought about that.
Give her a call.
Yep.
Where does that come from?
Yep.
I guarantee he says no all day long to convicts.
And the guy who was really my handler was not in that day. And he was a hard ass. At one point, he called me to task for leaving my home, because I had this breathalyzer in my house too that talked to the ankle bracelet. It knew when I came and went. As soon as I walk in the door, it called me up there. I couldn't even get my stuff out of the car. I would have to get out of the car and race upstairs and blow in that breathalyzer. It took my photograph, and then and it would go off. I remember the record was one Sunday that thing went off and called for me 7 times. Well, I left one morning to take my kids to school to be at his meeting with him one morning, and I left. It was 92 seconds early than I said I was going to leave. And he ripped my ass and called me to task for leaving 92 seconds. And, he was as straight-faced. I kept on wanting to look at him and think he's going to crack a smile in a minute. And he didn't. And he was going, you need to You need to be on time for that. Well, he wasn't there that day, and it was this other guy.
Absent that day.
Huh?
He just happened to be absent that day.
He just happened to be absent that day,
figure.
and it was Jim instead. And Jim called Janine, and Janine said, because Janine was more my social worker person, the other people were more my corrections people, and so I would meet with her every week, and because I had to go down there and turn in my schedules, turn in my verifications from the past week. I'd have to take my son to Scouts and get the Scoutmaster to sign my paper, take Chris to the dance and get the dance lady to sign. Scoutmaster was easy. The dance lady was no fun. And every place else I went, I had to get verifications for where I was at and turn those in. And I would talk to Janine, and our this professional relationship turned into a friendship. That one day I went down there and man, I was just going to say it. I could tell that she was hurting, and she was talking to me for a minute, and I could just see that something was on her. And I said, so how are you? And she just busted out, man. And her husband had just been diagnosed with cancer in his colon, and it was really bad. And there was a shift in it. And so up to that point, I'm coming down there, and I'm talking to her, and I'm telling her my woes. And a complete shift happened, and she felt safe enough with me to dump her shit on this convict, this inmate, and a relationship changed. And from that point forward, when I met with her, we shared with one another rather than that one-way street of me going in and reporting to her. It completely changed, and she's a friend of mine now still. She went to meditation classes with me. She's been to my sobriety birthdays. Her husband passed not long ago, and she took time out of her day to call me, text me, and tell me that it happened. Out of all the people in her life that's probably important to her, she took a minute to call me and let me know. That shit don't happen without this. Touches me big time. So throughout this, I'm going to go through these things, and you've heard them before if you listen to the Miracles podcast. Or you've heard some of them anyway. I get to travel for work a lot, and I was scared to death that during that time when I was on that home incarceration, they would ask me to travel, and I would have to tell them no, and I'd do a little thing when if you're looking at me and can see me, I would tell you no, and they'd say why, and I'd pull up my pant leg and show you my ankle bracelet. Which did happen a couple times at work where I was sitting around these tables, and I'd notice somebody across at a conference, like at a meeting, somebody be like looking down at my ankle, like, what is, like, kind of like the dog you don't understand look, what the hell, I pull my pant leg down, cover that up. So for that whole time, they didn't ask me to travel, which is another miracle. Really is. They just flat out. There's hardly ever been. I worked there for 28 years. There was hardly a year that I didn't travel someplace. I went through the home incarceration, same kind of deal, but they said I probably could travel, but it had to be approved by a judge. And so I got assigned to this team at work, and it was a privilege to be picked, an honor, but it was going to include this trip to Japan. And when I broached it with my probation officer, she looked at me and said, "You're going to Alabama." I still remember. She said, "If you're going to fly to Alabama or something, that probably is doable." She said, "I don't think the judge is going to let you go out of the country." And she said, "But if it ends up being that, we can file for it and we can ask and we can get permission." And so that was like in September, and the trip just kept on getting postponed. We were on the team, we were doing it, but the trip just kept getting postponed month to month, and then they didn't want to do it around the holidays. And it got to January, and they didn't want, so it got postponed another month. And I signed the papers and got off of home incarceration on February the 18th of that year, whatever the hell year it was. I got signed the papers on February the 18th, and I was on a plane to fly to Japan on February the 29th. 11 days later, that trip got pushed out. When I went over there, it was some kind of like spiritual Mecca thing. I really don't understand. I was operating on a complete different level in another country, something I've never really been able to do. I always had, even when I was playing sober, I had my domestic sobriety date and my overseas sobriety dates didn't jive. They didn't have. I didn't think they needed to. different time zones and all that. So it was the first time I actually went out to the country or went on any kind of travel, because when the cat was away, that's what I would do, even when I was playing sober. I never had a trip out of town where I kept a sobriety day. I might have told you I did, or not you, but told my people that I did. So that's another thing. Come back from that. I went to a Japanese AA meeting that day. Met one guy in there with the juice. We traded books. It was signed each other's books. Sit around and shared. I couldn't understand a word they said, and they couldn't understand a word I said either, but it didn't fucking matter.
I like how you found it. You ran across that guy smoking outside. Say, "Oh, it must be an AA meeting here." And then when you asked him AA, he was like, "What?"
Yeah, he
no reference in his brain, like this foreigner. What's he asking for AA?
Because I googled it and looked for it, over there. But I don't know. And I'm walking, I'm going, and I'm at this place at church, and but you can't really see anything. And that one guy was standing outside, smoking a cigarette. And I went up and said that to him, and yeah, he looked at me real suspiciously at first. And he took me in, he showed me I had to take off my shoes and all that, and they gave me this little pair, like a pair of 6 sandals, and I wear a 12. And I go in, and so he let me go. How they're really subservient. They're really honor you and humble around you, that kind of thing. And so he lets me go first. Well, when I walk into that AA meeting first, all those Japanese faces look at me, and they're looking at me like, "You are in the wrong place, man." I mean, they were shaking their heads and like it. And he comes in, and I can just tell him, he's speaking Japanese too, but I can just the gist of it is, "No, man, he's cool. He's one of us. It's cool. It's cool. It's cool." and they all change expression and wave me in, and sit down. They do it a round robin share, so they do that. And I'll tell you this is too, dang man, they're doing the readings at the beginning of the meeting, and I don't know what they're reading, right? But the cadence seemed to be that they were reading how it works at one point, and I'm following along in my book. And I think I'm just doing my best to follow along, just kind of like at the pace, that when they started and where it would be, and he's reading, and he gets to a spot, which I know today is, it says, our adventures before and after made clear 3 pertinent ideas, and he said A. Now, that's the only word he said in English was A. And that's where I was at in my book. And, man, another one of them chill moments, man. And then he said, blah, 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 B, blah, 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 C, blah, 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 and everybody went, blah, 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 if he were saw it. And they all said that.
They repeated it. That's awesome.
Together, but they did it in Japanese. I couldn't tell what they were saying, but I knew I was where I was at. You know what I mean? And man, the whole chills and the energy in that meeting, and that's what I was saying. I couldn't understand a word they said, and they couldn't understand a word I said, and it didn't matter a bit. It was one of the most fantastic days from the beginning to the end. I started out in a Confucian temple meditating with a guy that I work with, who is also of Asian descent, and he didn't know anything about it, so I shared with him about where I was at and everything. Another one of them dog you don't understand days, he's like, what? Tell him about breaking into houses, tell him all this stuff, and I'm like led to do that, and it's a guy I work with. It's actually, there's some risk involved in telling this guy that stuff. And I traveled from southern Nagasaki, Japan, to the northern part of Nagasaki, Japan. Went through the bomb, what they call it, ground zero, where the bomb hit, the museum, all the different stuff that's going on, and it just was just a day that I will never forget that day. And like I got up the next morning, that was a Saturday. I got up the next day. The night before, I stood on the top of a mountain. Nagasaki has one of the top 3 nightscapes in the world, ranked by somebody. And I stood there with the Japanese sun setting behind me over the Japanese Ocean, the sea or whatever, and looking down over the lights coming on in this beautiful port town in Nagasaki. And, just not so long ago, I had to ask the state if I could leave the county. And now I'm standing on top of that mountain in Japan looking over that stuff, free man.
That's so long ago. You're running through your neighborhood, pepper sprayed and sweating and dying for your next fix.
It was a magic day.
That's the miracle of recovery.
I've been introduced to yoga right before that for whatever reason, and that girl that was here in the house the night I broke in had done that and tricked me into going to a yoga class. And when I got home from Japan, I'd been toying with that yoga, just going weekly. And when I come home from that trip in Japan, something struck me, and I went and signed up for what they have 40 days unlimited yoga for $40, and that actually started that journey that ended up where I'm at today on that front. So that coming home from Japan was the catalyst to implement that yoga into my life at the level that I have. which was another huge, shift of a moment. My daughter spoke for Alateen. My kids engaged in Alateen right off the bat. Again, that touches me big time, man, watching my kids do that. My daughter spoke. She shared her story for kids in the local school system about that. And what I'll think about is like when adults are talking to these kids about drug and alcohol and different things like that, and parents that are probably using or whatever. It sounds like Charlie Brown's teachers talking to them, but when some other little kid talks to them, somebody on their level, they can hear that.
Let's emphasize this miracle. She was how old when she spoke? 9?
Yeah.
Yeah, because I was there. And she spoke better than 75% of speakers I've ever heard. The clarity about living with your father being an alcoholic, it just broke my heart too.
Yep.
We were all bawling.
Yeah.
It was one beautiful.
Yeah, it's another. That's why it's on my miracle list. Is my kids taking it? I beat a big Alateen drum today, and they're not too involved with it now. They're in teenage years, and it is Alateen. They were pre-teen before and we had to ask permission. Could they come to Alateen because it says teen? He said, yeah, and the two people who were sponsoring, the male and female were sponsoring, let them come in, and they've been on Alateen conventions and other things in a short amount of time, and it really touched them, and I'll credit that today with being able to survive some of the things that's happened of late, of having that, even what limited exposure was to that then. We talk about, you've heard on the podcast about these recovery retreats, In my second year of recovery, I hosted 2 men's retreats at my place out in the country. That's crazy stuff, man. To have that opportunity to do that early in recovery. Some people haven't been to 2 men's retreats in in that amount of time, let alone hosting them. And, this just past May, last month, was number 6. And we had another magical time, and it's just another way that I get to participate in my recovery at some level. It just doesn't make sense to me, and it's there was never any I can't do this going on either. You guys, and especially you, encourage me to not put any limits on what I can do here, what I can do in recovery for myself and for others. And that buddy of mine that told me that line of you must participate in your recovery. And I still say that, and I'm starting to close my podcast with thank you. I did that from when I was a treasurer forever. Thank you for allowing me to participate in my recovery in this manner. I get to participate in my recovery in a lot of real cool ways today. That gal that was here went into 12 steps because of what she saw change in me. And she went into a different compulsive eating side of the 12-step things and accelerated her deal beyond what she thought was possible. She'd had weight loss surgery. She'd come down from like 380 pounds, something like that, and plateaued just on her own stuff, and came in and got in recovery, found yoga, just like the same thing, got in recovery, and then came down to like a regular person's weight, and now she's a yoga teacher and leading that same Y12SR thing that I was brought into to begin with, and another miracle 12-step recovery story in a different fellowship. And it's just this ripple effect of when you start implementing this stuff in your life, you never know who you're going to affect and how it's going to do it. And you get to watch that happen, man. It's just pure magic to watch these people completely transform and change as a result of working these steps, no matter if it's for this substance or some other or a behavior or whatever it is. I get to speak a lot. I get to share on this. I stopped using nicotine 592 days ago. I know that to the day. I thought it was kind of funny when I first started dropping nicotine. One day I sit with a sponsee across the table and said, I was telling him about improving the quality of our lives in recovery, and I was spitting in a cup, and it just hit me like a ton of bricks. That's a little hypocritical. And I went on a journey of looking to stop that, and I started doing these YouTube videos on that nicotine quitting thing, and they just used brotherhood, accountability, fellowship to quit, and you promised one another, and we had roll call, so you'd post your day count every day on this website, and I started doing, and that was my promise to you and your promise to me that we wouldn't use nicotine today, and they were pretty hardcore, man. If you used, man, they beat you up. They made it really hard. I'm glad 12-step recovery doesn't make it so hard to come back, because they make it hard to come back over there. But I started doing a video roll call, and I know that's what's led up to this podcast, and I don't know that, I didn't see that happening at the time. But I sat up on the deck up there and did like a 12-second video on my day 12, which is kind of funny, of my nicotine quitting. And I did over 100 of those videos after that eventually rolled into this podcast of doing this. And I started implementing 12-step recovery into my little talks about the nicotine quitting, and people started liking it, and I ended up getting banned from that. I think I was too juicy. I really do. I think it was a power thing where they don't come into my turf with that stuff. I get a relationship with my dad today. My mom passed since I've been in recovery. I was able to participate in that, actually be able to be a son and be a support person, and actually be the support person, because my dad wasn't really able to handle that. My brother wasn't in a position to be able to participate in that either, and I played that pivotal role in there. I ended up delivering the very drugs that I would have loved to have, that were ended up with things that helped my mom go into the next life in a comfortable manner. There's just no way I'd been doing that. Here I am dispensing those very drugs and stayed out of them. And when they come around at hospice at the end, they took the drugs away. They asked me, "You want me to take those?" I said, "Yes, I do." Dad's been sick a couple times, man. I've been able to do that. He lives with me today. The guy that sat underneath that tree right over there, man, and patted me on the knee and said, everything's going to be okay. I get to help him be okay today. He's my roommate now. Another way I get to participate in my recovery and get to be a part of life that is beyond my understanding.
So one of the things that strikes me most dramatically about how he changed is how he go from the bottom of the heap to the top. And I know one story about your father when he was in the hospital, what he said to you. Tell that story.
Yeah, he would talk about moving in, and we beat it around for a while. And it was something to be thinking about. You don't know if you want that relationship to grow in that manner, to be where you're living with each other. That can have a really bad effect too. So we talked about it for like over a year. And Dad moved in, and within 3 weeks of him moving in, I found him upstairs in a big pool of blood. And I think of that, if he hadn't moved in with me, who knows what would have happened if he'd have been home. It was over a Christmas holiday, and I'd have probably seen him, but who knows how soon or what, and he was living alone. So it happened to be that he was here so that I could help him with that. And it ended up being that it was his gallbladder had ruptured. And so overall it wasn't as bad as what it looked, but he passed out and fell down and busted the shit out of his face, and that's where all the blood came from. So I take him in, and he had a miraculous thing. He was in the world of hurt, and he scares me to death. He's 81 now, and then they get him turned around, and they take out his gallbladder, and he's sitting in the recovery room, or back in his room, not in the recovery room. He's back in his room, and I'm getting ready to leave for the night, and he looked me right in the eyes and thanked me, and he said, He said, "Thank you, Dan." He said, "I can always count on you. You are always there for me. That's not the way it used to be." And he can count on me today. And to say, it's shifted from he said, "You're always there for me." I haven't always been. But that's where he was landing that day. Touches me. He's a hell of a dude. He helped. I went and seen an eclipse a couple years ago. In 2017, it worked out real crazy. Took my kids to go do that. Ended up on a mountain in Tennessee, watching a total 100% in the totality zone. I didn't even know that's on my bucket list. Mm-hmm. That's another miracle
We're
I
doing the
added
next
to my
one for
list,
sure.
man. Yeah, is I'm standing there with my kids on a hilltop with people I'd never met before, because a mutual friend had said, "Hey, you want someplace to go? My cousin owns a place. Why don't you go down there?" And just out of the blue, and be able to have the wherewithal to be able to walk into that too, which is something I wouldn't have had in recovery, but actually call and ask somebody to do that. Stand there and experience that eclipse thing. Those guys are my friends too now, and I've invited them back up on. I know it seems like a long ways, but it's like 2024, I think.
Yeah, I think that's right.
It's going to be totality here. It's going to be it's 100% over top of the camp where the retreat is.
That's right.
And we'll all be. Hopefully, I got to go do some spotting over there. Hopefully, there'll be enough sky to be able to see it. Mm-hmm. This shop that we're in right here, that dream of doing that. You told me to find something creative. It'd be good to find something creative and something I like to do. And I just stumbled in. I didn't even think about this woodworking thing that I had going on. All these tools were in my basement, and I made something. And I remember you kind of like, I still remember like ding, 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 ding. Hey, man, we were talking about, well, how come? And so it ended up being that this woodworking thing, because I thought when we was on home incarceration that I was going to be spending a lot of time at home at one point. Remember, we thought that might be the case and be good for me to have something to do healthy at home that would keep me motivated and stuff. And it's turned into something, and this darn shop out here is manifested off of that. Here I got this dream shop of a lot of these tools were my grandfather's tools, and then my dad's tools, and then mine, and now I'm sitting here making stuff, and I make the same pot that made this table we're sitting here doing this podcast on, and a month ago, couple months, it's getting on 3 months now. 3 months ago, I was turned loose of that job that I'd held for 28 years, and I know that was my next step. It wasn't working for me anymore, and recovery just wasn't aligned with my path. And it looks like this woodworking thing and the yoga teaching. So I've been to yoga teacher training school since then, stumbled into that, and now I practice that on a regular basis. I have to look at my sheet for a minute. Doing these podcasts, getting to help guys. I'm just blessed with the guys like the sponsees that come my way, the guys that have been to God. I'll break up again. Have put in my path, man. The guys I'm getting sponsored are just unreal, man. I've just had this, and this ain't me. I always say it ain't me. It ain't me. It's these 12 steps. 9 guys have done fifth steps down to the cabin. 9 guys have done. I'm 4 years. I just celebrated 4 years. 9 guys have done fifth steps down at the cabin. All of them are still sober. Some of them are thriving, like Chase, you've heard here.
I'd say all of them are thriving.
All of them really are. Yeah,
are
all thriving. Yeah, you're right. Some of them are like rocket ship thriving. Mm-hmm. Get to do that and get to be a part. There's nothing like 12-step work when you get into this. That's where the juice is when all that stuff that happened to me was cool, and the things I'm getting to do is cool. When I get to hand somebody the gift that is this recovery thing and watch it work in their lives, all the rest of this can go if I get to keep doing that. That's all I really need in my life today is to do that. I think I ran out of gas, man.
Wow, we're at a momentous moment. Wow, great story, Dan. You have been a blessing in my life. You've been one of my most, I would say, stellar students. You were ready to learn. You were ready to move. I do believe that this progress and this level of speed is available to anyone. I think you're absolutely right. We limit ourselves, and we get stuck in habit, and we get stuck in the familiar, and we're scared of change. So we're like, okay, that's enough. Just I don't want to grow too fast. Don't want to grow too much. But your path was one of the fastest I've ever seen towards spiritual involvement. How quickly and how much you've evolved from where you started. It's been a great pleasure of my life. I'm honored to be able to sponsor you, and you help me every day of my life. And we want to take this to the rest of the world, so that's what we're going to do, because it is just no better way to live on this planet.
Those are the miracles.
There is no better way to live on this planet than what you just described.
Yeah, I didn't mention getting to be, we did this TSSR podcast, getting to be a part of this TSSR movement. That's another miracle of being able to have this door opened. I mean, to have a whole nother group of people that we can deliver this to. Man, I just...
People, nothing. We're taking it to the world, growing. Man.
Yeah.
We're just getting started.
Yeah.
So, now you have a tradition on your podcast when you're running out of time, and you always like to give the last word to the guest about anything you would like to end on to take us out. Again, it's been a great pleasure interviewing you today. Thanks for asking me here, but you have the last word.
Well, thank you for doing this with me. I knew that when I started doing this whole podcast thing, and it just evolved, whatever it did, and I got the idea about doing this interview form of letting somebody tell their story and do that, and the first couple of guys were my sponsees, so it just worked out. And it looked like maybe that's the way that was going to go, was that we were going to have people in here that got interviewed by their sponsor, whoever that may be. I knew that who I wanted to be on the other side of the table as I was able, when I had my opportunity to tell my story here. And that's another thing about this is we get a little bit of an open time frame, and it's just tough to cram everything. I've got a hell of a story, I really do, and I can own that today and not apologize for it. And it ain't a 40-minute story. It just ain't. And, you know, I do my little pause, man. This whole thing and this trajectory of life of having lived the things I've lived, haven't had the consequences I had, haven't met you, and being able to have opportunity to absorb the knowledge and the experiences you've gained on your 35 years here of the sobriety journey. And you know, and you know, at some level, like if you could like take and do like a orange juice concentrate, you know, and you got this 35 years, it took a lot for you to get, right? I mean, you share about that, and that didn't come easy, and it didn't come fast, but like now it's been developed into this concentrate, you know, that's a God carries a big pow quickly, and we get to see that happen, and it happened for me, and now I get to give that away to other people. It's just flat out amazing, man. I've had tears sitting in the corners of my eyes for a good little piece of this podcast because of how touching and how much, I mean, it's no kidding that it's life-saving, it's revolutionary. It completely transforms people, and to get to be a product of it, and now be a person who gets to hand it to other people. That buddy of mine, some of those things that still ring, you know, that buddy of mine that told me early on, and you've heard me say it a few times lately, that if you, and I will revise it per what you said in your birthday. If you need some better in your life, and you put these 12 steps, you work these 12 steps, and you put these principles in your life is going to get a whole lot better. And if you don't, there's a real good chance it's going to get a whole lot worse. Now, when it first got put to me, it was because of my alcohol use and that kind of thing. But these 12 steps will work no matter what. And we get to do that. Because like Mark Houston told me, and I say it all the time, I know this is not, my higher power didn't bring me here to drop me off. And I've been taught that I smell more. There's more around the next corner. And this limitless load that Bill talked about is available as long as I continue to work it and mine it and be willing to give it all away. So thank you all for allowing me to participate in my recovery in this manner. Thank you too for you guys that were sitting in here listening to me today. I know it's it's a hell of a lot of time to sit and invest and listen to some dude talk. So I appreciate you all being here. Spiritualunderground.org. 12-Step Spiritual Recovery at Amazon by James Christopher Cone, and Darren Frank's music is wrapped around this podcast. Contact me at spiritualunderground.org. Thank y'all. Out.
They give you love and the selfish they just take. Not concerned about the heart that they will break. The hurt you feel inside soon will turn